Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session on Agile Specialization. Agile is an innovation-friendly approach to our product development. Currently, our software development processes are pretty robust. We have a lot of great technology and software being produced, but there's also a lot of waste. Some sources say users actually use only as little as 20% of features. The failure rates for new products in ID projects is pretty high. Now, there are two ways to specifically solve this problem. One is the user satisfaction. We have to focus on creating valuable software for the users. Second one is doing something called continuous innovation. Well, this is where Agile plays an important role, and Agile kind of stands in the intersection of these two things. Now, it is a systematic approach for innovation in a meaningful way where all the teams work together to produce better results. So in our upcoming session, that is in our course number 1, we will learn to go to, talk to users, find out what's really on their A list, and look into their needs specifically. Next, in our course number 2, we will learn to create time-boxed iterations called design sprints, where we go out to the required discovery so that we can come up with some actionable inputs to produce some more valuable software. Now, in a lot of ways, Agile is a pretty big departure from our traditional management. So in our course number 3, we will learn how to create self-organizing teams to work in collaborative and small batches. Agile is also very experiment-driven. In our course number 4, we will discuss to do the things in small batches to try something, observe the results, and repeat again so that we can run experiments with Agile to create a culture of experimentation. So I look forward to seeing you all and doing a lot of experimentations within the Agile environment and methodology. So that's all for our first session, everybody. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the session on running design sprints. Now, in this course, we'll learn how to execute design sprints in 4 specific areas. First, we will learn about how to go out and understand the user requirements and the user problems which need to be solved considering their jobs, habits, and desires. We will use their personas to describe the users and their problem scenario to describe their order of importance. In the second time of design sprint, we will learn to use different methods from win setup to test to check whether our solution is adequately valuable to the user over their current alternatives. We definitely don't want to build a software which nobody uses. In our third type of the design sprint, we'll show you how to test usability with user stories and prototypes. In a fourth type of design sprint, we will learn to evaluate our architectural alternatives with our team. Now, design sprints are a time-boxed exercise where we will have constraint of availability of time to perform design sprints. So we have to push ourselves to focus and experiment and not go astray over the extraneous details. Now, we will have a specific set of inputs, objectives, and specific outputs, which helps us to provide more valuable outcomes for the user. Now, design sprints are a very popular way to execute the methods which help us to drive value to the user rather than creating just a lot of output. Now, we may have heard about the concept of one-week iterations. These one-week iterations have been popularized by Google Ventures, among other companies. It is a pretty good amount of time to create something substantial and valuable. So considering one-week iteration in our course, we will learn about a very specific day-to-day agenda. It may seem a bit tedious and little detailed, but the reality is that these formats will help you to focus on the substance of the end result rather than wasting time in improving or improvising these little details of keeping our team focused on the right things. Now, these agendas will help you to encounter little impediments and then roadblocks. Now, we will use some of the common things with the designers like easels, post-its, and dot voting with sticker dots. We will learn ways to use them in design sprints. Now, going further in the course, we will learn to capture things as we go along. This is considered to be equally prevalent, but which is kind of less visible. So we will spend a lot of time in writing content in design sprints so that we encapsulate it for our later use. Now, at the time, it might not be very exciting, but what we really care is not just about this one-week design sprint, but to create a durable outcome with our users. So after completing design sprints of 30, 90, and 180 days, we will have results from the design sprint, which will help us to deliver more value to the user. So now, we've learned about what is design sprint, its importance, and how to approach it as part of our course. That's all for this session. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to this course. So far, we've discussed about design sprints and different ways of doing it. In this session, let's look into the details such as people who will be involved in the design sprints and also closely observe when to go about running these design sprints. In this course, we have 4 different types of design sprints that we're going to cover. We shall go through them one by one. Now, the first type of sprint is the problem scenario sprint. In this sprint, we are looking at who is the user, what makes them click, what are the problems they face, and ideas what's on their A list. Now, there are a set of queries that we need to address, else we might be clueless of what exactly we're getting into. Either we will be solving the problem or solving it without any knowledge. Nowadays, even if you go ahead and build an amazing software that doesn't adhere to your needs of solving the customer's problems, then you're definitely in deep trouble. Now, the first sprint is going to be all about that. Now, there's some periodic things we need to know. If you're building any new product or a feature, certainly we should be doing this. To refresh your understanding of who the user is and what's on the list, it's always a good thing to carry out things periodically. By doing this, we can keep that foundation understanding strong and durable. It's the best way to introduce new team members to the subject matter and keep everybody engaged with those high-quality narrative collaborations that are very crucial to successful agile outcomes. Next up, let's discuss about motivation sprints. So we clearly get who is this user and what they want. Do we have any alternatives where they can use this product from us? Well, in the motivation sprint, we understand the fundamental proposition and moreover get to know things in advance. All this is done before we spend a lot of time and money building software to determine whether or not the user is actually going to find what we are compelling. Now let us take these and figure out how to do discovery and experimentation to answer that question. We shall look closely into usability in the next sprint. So far, we have discussed about how there's a relationship between motivation and usability, which is described by the fog curve. We need to do well on both to get on the outside of that curve and accomplish something that's valuable and easy enough to the user that they're motivated and it's usable and they actually go ahead and use our product. So let's look at the usability angle. So far, we have defined the problem of the user, figuring out propositions that are motivating, but the main question that arises is, have we made it easy for them to use? Now, usability sprint is the way to go. It provides solutions with user stories and prototypes anchored in a very specific type of research design. Also, it is focused on testing that usability vector very specifically. It is accessible, clinical, and more specific. Using that tool, any layman can approach the usability. Now we have figured out what we want to build. Next thing to look at is how we're going to build it. Well, the building blocks that we create can matter in a lot of terms of cost, durability, and quality of the software that we create in modern software development. So the architecture sprint will help you, as the sprint lead, ask the right queries, supply the right inputs to your technical team so that you can work through and make sure you're making the right decisions about the platform elements. Indeed, it kind of helps to execute the solution by using the building block elements. It has to deal with actual working product, and we in fact will use user stories and prototypes to answer some of those questions. Now, the main thing to look at is how do you really motivate your team? Who's going to be part of this design sprint? Well, to my understanding and knowledge, I would recommend the whole team to be part of the design sprint. It might be the case for different roles. For engineering and QA, it's all about ensuring that they're going to work on something valuable and also try to get that kind of quality inputs. This will certainly help them make the decisions and avoid the business people changing their minds at the wrong times. Now, for sales and support, it's a chance for them to really go out on a daily basis to create a structured understanding of how to solve the problem. We might not even have a problem selling these design sprints to the developers if they're part of our team, but it's a great choice and a great chance for them to operationalize a lot of the tools they're probably familiar with and put those into a durable structure that's really actionable. It will help in the daily basis of what you will all build. So now just think about this for an instance. You may get the question of why would the developer be in on any of these design sprints? Firstly, developers are really hard to find, right? And they're pretty expensive. So it's certainly going to be a waste of time and money to pull them on this design sprint when you look at it at a scalability point of view. Now, we're assuming that we have created a maximum amount of output. They all come from different places, and they may or may not be valid for your situation. But if you're buying this idea for a lot of products where 20% of the features are used and the rest 2/3 of ID projects end up failing, among these, you can think about 90% of them are going to be mobile apps. Now, mostly new products that are downloaded only once and never used, we end up getting into two main problems to solve. One is being able to generate enough output, enough software to run the business, but it's equally important that we build something valuable. Always think of building something valuable, which is equally important to get hold of these statistics, and that is somewhat applicable to your situation. I mean, imagine, if you could take the number of features used from 20 to 40%, it would be almost like doubling your development and implementation staff. Now, isn't that a bit of an interesting piece of trivia, right? Now, the value of having your teams in these design sprints makes it worthwhile, so that we can drive to what's valuable instead of just optimizing to deliver more stuff. We later kind of think, well, is this really agile in a way? Of course it is. If you're working iteratively and understood what's valuable to the customer, then there's no need to worry. Now, we are creating individual interactions that are going to result to inputs that are going to drive to value. Also, we are creating working items. Not all of them technically software, but we're going to be driving to very specific testable outputs. We can look at them and say, do we understand what's going to be valuable to the customer? Or do we need to know something else before we put time and money building software that nobody cares about? So these are highly collaborative and they allow us to understand what we are heading to in very small batches. Now, in these design sprints, there may be many things that define the core goals of Agile. This will help to avoid twin antipoles of failed research. Now, lots of executives who are banking to sell these design sprints to have paid for a lot of research and haven't received anything so far. Now, that's the reality, all right? So a lot of this research that they do is traditionally that they may have been paid for. So this makes it a perfect fit for what? Innovation. Now, it doesn't help us make actionable decision about what's going to be valuable to the user. On the other side, it's really easy to kind of look around at this research and get stuck at some places. Now, we got very less time to carry this out. Moreover, it drives to really specific valuable things that we can sell to management, that we can engage our team with, and that ultimately we can use all this to drive something that's valuable to the user. So this design sprint technique will help us strike this balance and actually helps to achieve the same goal that we are looking for. So that's it for this particular session, everyone. Kind of go through the session again. If you have any questions, let us know. Thanks a lot for watching. Hi everybody and welcome back. Now in this video we're going to look at which of these design sprints that we might want to do. Here the sequence follow basically corresponds to the venture design process we've been looking at. By looking at this sprint diagram, we might feel free that there are a lot of things to do, but however, there are 3 things about that. 1, if we do each of these, it will take a month. 2, we may not have time to do all of them, and we go through the outputs of each one in a minute here and figure out which one is most important at any given point. And then the third thing, it's nothing at all or nothing is being propositioned. Now we're going to go through these modules, and if we never get a chance to do a full week design sprint, we can still learn how to use the individual session types and applications. So let's look at the outputs that come out of these different type of design sprints. It's a good way to think backwards and about what we need. The outputs of the problem scenario sprint are validated personas and problems. So we don't deliver in a relevant solution that solves a problem nobody has. So if we are not sure that the problem really exists for the user or who exactly that user is and what they're about, we would probably consider doing this. At the end of it, we will also draft working user stories so that we can drive to conclusion. 1, that's a good tool to keep focus. 2, you never know when you have to just jump forward and build some software. And 3, it's a really good catalyst to think about where you are and what your next step should be. So we're going to actually see this on all of those levels here. Now in a motivation sprint, we might think that there might be a problem that actually exists. So it's important. But do we have a proposition that's compelling? So here we get validated propositions. And here we will take these validated propositions, think about what they need, and incorporate those into updated stories. So we are always going to go to the hoop, driving in conclusions. Now in a usability sprint, we're going to take this problem that people have, this proposition that's compelling, and look at how do we present them interface that are highly usable, which lower the barrier to getting this proposition and are highly relevant and appropriate to the task at hand. And then here we'll deliver user stories and mockups. And in fact, as part of the process, we may develop interactive mockups because the sprint type does not require us to have actual working software in the sense of real code. We look at how to use interactive prototypes to achieve the objectives of the sprint before we invest in working software, so that we can make sure it's usable and valuable to the user. And finally, it's the architecture sprint. It is about going backwards at what is the best way to put this thing together given what we want to actually have happen. Now, the resources we have on hand, the life the software is going to have, and after we build it in terms of maintenance, supportability, different people in different roles who are actually going to be using it. So we have a lot of tested user stories that we write about and evaluate against various alternatives. And here again, we have a bunch of user stories, and that is the final output. Now, a few tips on deciding which sprint to do. We might have questions like whether it's a new feature. Well, the answer is no. We need to make sure that we are staying connected to what's valuable rather than just keeping to generate more output and hoping that the features turn up to be useful. And we might also think, do we really need to just have one topic area for the sprint particularly? The answer is yes, because that's going to help us stay focused and make sure we get enough done when we are existing with some meaningful, valuable output. However, we may find as we do some of these here that as you've been going through the sprints once or maybe twice that you can create composite sprints. We may find it easy to remove the uncertainty of designing our own composite sprint initially and also stick to the templates that we're going to go through in the modules that follow initially. We may also have more comfort to vary them and change them around. Now that's the basics of how to decide which sprint to consider and which could be really a good fit for us. So I hope you guys enjoyed this session and learned a little bit about motivation sprints and a little bit about the architecture sprint and the usability sprint. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Hi everybody and welcome back. Now in this lecture, let's talk about how to sell this idea of a design sprint. Now we have talked earlier about how we might talk to our immediate colleague about design sprint. Now let's talk about how we manage upwards to the executive or maybe to some project manager that's overseeing the entire project. It's basically going to talk a little bit about stakeholder management. Now, do not make too big a deal about it. Now, this is not like telling that, hey, this is just part of ensuring that we're going to make some good software, which is going to make the company money. Now, that's something that most of these managerial audiences are ultimately going to care about. They don't want to make a big deal of it saying we're going to try this new thing and it's really novel. They're probably not even going to like that. They just want us to deliver valuable software. And then, how do we create linkages with what matters to them? So far, we learned about design thinking, empathy, and creativity. We will apply that to our job of managing upwards. Thus, what do they care about? And what are their main drivers, both emotionally and intellectually? What are the things that are most important to them? Because they say that we need this software delivered on time and it shouldn't really break. And so on and so forth. But in reality, that's not going to matter much if the software isn't relevant to users. They don't want a failure, and nobody does. Therefore, it's important to establish linkages with what we're going to drive to, what's valuable with what they find important. And they're probably very closely aligned, but we will need to figure out how they think about these things and articulate that to them directly. Now, don't really overdo it, but just use our newfound design thinking skills when managing upward communication and just keep that in consideration. Now, if part of our job here is to get a buy-in in order to kind of observe internal staff or customers, or we basically have to convince someone, for example, a manager, or let's say a gatekeeper, or to some group of people that we want to observe that we're going to go out and do that. It's really going to be okay. You're going to be able to manage it if your design thinking and creativity is in sync. Now, ensure it's clear that we are just here to observe. We're not here to evaluate or say anything or do anything. That will help initiate that conversation in a way which is less likely to freak them out. Now, sometimes it's easier to sell this stuff as lean, and we will try to do something lean so we don't create waste. Rather that, to them, the more vague value of design. So you want to make sure that they understand that the vague value of design versus how lean the actual project is are actually interconnected. So this has something to do with these things we talked about before, about the accent of what's important to companies, innovation, and stuff like that, where basically you want to make sure that everyone's design thinking and structural strategy is in place. But the fact that design practice is a widespread thing, which manages understanding, it's still very nascent and something which is still happening and also increasing and evolving. But it's not really reached a sort of omnipresent distribution on managers yet, as in the thinking is not evenly spaced out even now. And now, don't ever lead with this, right? So because we actually don't. You never ever lead with a philosophy or a aesthetic like that. We want this to be a good news story. But there are some quite worrying figures about how much software users actually use. And as I've said, we cite these different studies and they may or may not apply to our situation, or they may apply to greater or lesser extent. But the reality is a lot of software is being developed which users don't like and don't care about. And probably most people won't find that so surprising. So don't be afraid to mention that because we get all fixated on our immediate deadlines, but we know that our ultimate outcome is the most important. And that's a good way to talk about this with data. So our company is very fact-driven or data-driven and improvise. If we can't sell management on doing a 1-week design sprint, you have to learn these techniques. They're imperative for the way forward. So that's all for this particular lecture. Thanks a lot for joining in, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back. Now, in this lecture, we will study the design sprint checklist. Now, if you're on the sprint lead, this module is going to help you to plan your sprint go smoothly. You're going to get great valuable results and your team is going to be well used and productive throughout the sprint. Now, first off, you've got a really strong focus. What sprints are we doing? Why? If one of our team members asks us, what will we get out of this sprint and what's really going to be useful to the next iteration that's going to be part of that sprint, to our project, to our company, and we want to be comfortable answering those questions. Now, we've talked about that stuff here, and we talked about many of the foundation concepts as well. And I highly recommend that you practice those quickly, at least so that you're comfortable discussing that subject with them. Now, there's definitely something called a sprint guide, a Google Doc, which we can all use, and we will want that to make sure that it's shared with everybody. We can also share it with Google Docs or convert it into a corporate calendar or also do both. Now, just understand it's really a place for people to make notes and for us to think about what we will do and when. Let's say we're going to split up and do different activities midweek. That's where we can kind of keep track of it. Therefore, make sure that it's up and ready. We want to make sure this idea attracts the team. Now, how attract, right? So what we want to make sure of it, that at least some show interest into trying this out. So it's not physics. There's no way we can confirm the first principles that we can build sprint and it'll be great. But if they're invested enough to know what's important to the customer, then it's worth trying for at least a week, right? And that's something that's kind of productive and really good. So we have succeeded and that's enough. And the reason this is necessary is that, as we have mentioned, everyone just wants to focus on generating output. They calculate local efficiency, which is okay. It's their nature. And two of the strategies you're going to use here will be to have a lot of teammates who might be new. So they'll probably feel really weird and really uncomfortable, but we want to make sure that they're actually bought into this concept. So the first thing you want is you want a room available, and hopefully it has at least a whiteboard and a projector. So we can actually communicate, exchange items, and want some specific supplies listed in the course material and descriptions of where we can get them. So I like being wider to put ideas on the board. We will see how these work in the items that follow. So sticker dots, a few things like that, markers, Sharpies too. Make sure they're ready to go. We will want Google Docs prepared, and we went through an example of how to build subsections or a pre-collaborator basis so that we have a place that each of them can go and put in their notes to materials, so that people don't overwrite each other's changes, and we can go as the sprint lead or whoever will consolidate the material to find one person versus the material of another. Now, it may sound a little complicated, but it's really important. Otherwise, we will find things difficult. Participants could get lost and feel that they don't know what to do during those sessions. Now, an email distribution is significant. A list is the best thing, or just an email to copy or react to the items in the two headers. We just want to make sure that if you use email, everyone can contact each other quite easily. It's very helpful. So some form of screen sharing app, be it Google Hangouts or Skype or whatever that you have available, even Cisco AnyConnect or Adobe Connect can work. So, and even GoToMeeting. Now, what we want is to be able to have a sit-in in a conference room and share each other's work. For example, Google Doc, and not have someone just unplug, put in a projector to get it to work and all that stuff. So nothing ad hoc and nothing available on the fly. Everything has to be there from the get-go. Now, we can use one computer to share things around the room quite quickly, and that's incredibly helpful and promotes this sharing, as well as we'll address later. So the crucial facet of putting people on the stage and showing them their work, which kind of keeps everybody centered and inspired, actually helps them learn and pushes them to good, useful outputs. Now, a group chat is a really good thing to have, especially if people end up in the field part of the time or want to leave notes after hours. So Slack is a great platform that's very focused on this kind of functionality. But anything or everything may not be perfect, right? So any kind of chat platform we have at home would work great too. So we'll use the Balsamiq mockup tool. Now, many others are perfectly okay as well, but that's the one that we'll actually be showing you and something that I'll be showing you. So whatever we're going to use, we could want everyone use the same thing and make sure they've got at least a trial version of whatever the software is. And you've got a way for them to share their data. Now, the Balsamiq version we'll use is built into Google Drive, so it fits well with the rest of our stuff. Now, subjects, it's really big in reality. We have a whole couple of lessons dedicated to it in the sprint problem scenario section. So just because it's one of the first, we want to make sure we have enough experience with the team to understand the basic segments we're referring to. Because for the sprints that involve real human subjects, most of them, we usually want to make sure that either A, we have already lined up subject in advance, or B, we have validated a situation where we can go and find topics on the fly and then interview them. Otherwise, we will have a lot of downtime, and we may not be able to finish the sprint in a week. So we'll cover this a lot in the following modules, but I figured I just put it on your radar at this stage so that it's kind of part of your purview in the upcoming module. So finally, we want to have a timer. I like using a timer app on my iPad, but you obviously need a place to show how much time is left. And that's really important for reasons that we're going to delve into here in a little bit. But it also helps keeps the activities focused, and it helps avoid a lot of things that can make these exercises really difficult. Now, again, many of the methods we're going to use here are about and will always be centered around working together. Diverging, converging stuff, working in these small batches will be really new to many people. And having structure around that is really crucial, or we may have trouble getting these sessions really going. Now, so that's great. We have completed the design sprint checklist. The lesson materials contain a lot of supporting items. As we go forward, we'll speak in more depth about how to do a lot of this stuff, particularly the more complicated things that involve a lot of subjects. So that's all for this particular lecture. Go through the design sprint checklist I spoke about, make a checklist of your own, compare it to mine, and I'll see you in the next session. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Now let's talk about something that's called time boxing. Now, when we pass through the specifics of the following sprint, we will see lots of time box for very specific intervals, like 10 minutes and 20 minutes. And this practice is really useful when we help the team work in new ways. Now, to do these new things and have these three elements, very small specific tasks so we know exactly what we're doing, and we have examples and templates to help model our output in the right direction, which is just enough time to get it done and not get it done perfectly, because we are not trying to do that here. And show and tell, if you've ever seen the TV show The Voice, one thing we always see is that there are those judges who mentor the singers and they're saying, hey, I'm here to help. Now, nonetheless, You'll be there before the audience and the other judges, and we don't want to put undue pressure on our team members. But the show and tell element is really helpful. We're talking about presenting things. Now, it often helps us work better. However, there are 3 elements of this time boxing practice, and we will see them in action as we go through the individual sprint. Now, here's a simplified narrative of how it works. And one of their main jobs is preventing procrastination and distraction. So let's say we're batching up a whole bunch of things. That's our sprint lead, personas, problem scenarios, before and after story. But it's like 90 minutes of stuff if we work fast and hard. Now, as we say, okay, here's a big bunch of time, go to that, our design sprinter may think, wow, that's a lot of new stuff. Now, first time, it's hard to do these things. It's hard for anyone to do anything first, right? And there's this kind of urgent email, and we know how to answer it, so maybe we will do that. And it takes me 5 or 10 minutes, and we feel that we're doing something, but we really should be concentrating on what's going on in the design screen. And let's presume we're giving them 30 minutes or maybe just 20 minutes to draft a whole persona. So we showed them this, they have an example, and then they work with a partner. And then they're more likely to say yes. Well, and this really won't be perfect, and we don't know if we're doing correctly, but we are going to try to do something. So it basically becomes a win for us. Now, if we are doing that regularly with these exercises, if everyone at least does it, we will probably find they're really doing great things. Now, here's another example, and this is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. We're trying to fiddle around the edges of things we don't care for. It's all raw material draft stuff. I mean, we're going to clean things up at the end, but that's really something at the end. We're only trying to generate more ideas to unleash the team's collective wisdom. And we force ourselves to keep learning, chat, and collaborate as a team. We're giving them lots of time. Maybe they'll focus on resizing tables, changing their color or something like that. And not to suggest the template is perfect, but at this point, it doesn't matter. The goal is to be able to generate stuff, to be able to talk about it and diverge a lot of ideas and drive stuff that's really valuable. Now, the time boxing helps us move to something that's not perfect, but okay. And we avoid distracting with little things that don't really matter. Now, those are just a few notes as to why we are doing the time boxing thing and how unsuccessful versus successful outcomes look when you're doing stuff in your sprints. But that's all for this particular lecture involving time sprints, involving time boxing. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Now, let's have a look at the anatomy of one of these sprints. Now, we will talk through each type in the material that follows. Here, we'll look at the common elements we're going to see. Now, they all have some prep work, which is day 0 stuff, we call it. Now, these are things that we want to ensure we do as a sprint lead to make sure everything else goes smoothly. Now, usually on day 1 and maybe on day 2, we will have some drafting material depending on which sprint. We will push ourselves to see what we learn, help everyone understand what the final output will look like, and above all, inspire us for this very important field work. Now, this is where we will have contact, some kind of meaningful contact with users that will help us understand what actually makes them tick and move, what motivates them, what's usable to them, whatever our sprint topic is. And that'll usually be through 2 to 4 days. Now, then on day 5, we will invest most of that on results and packaging. What have we learned actually? How do we make sure all this stuff we wrote down is well prepared and usable for the next 30, 90, and 180 days, which we might forget what it means in a week or so. And then, where are we? What have we learned, and are we ready to build stuff? If so, let's write some stories. And what else do we need to know? Now, if we don't feel ready, do we need another design sprint? If so, what would be its charter, and how will it help us to move forward? That's what we will finish off with on day 5. Now, some terms that we'll find in the materials are for day 0 stuff. And remember, when you say day 0, it's something that's used in amazing companies like Amazon or Adobe. They always have a saying that says it's always day 0. So that's be prepared. So we will have a concept review so that we can use some introductory material to present these ideas to our team. And then a sprint type specific checklist. For day 1, we will have a brief or charter to write to present our team and introduce our sprint definition of success and our objectives for the sprint. And then we will have a series of time block sessions. Now, the field work will have some very specific notes on how we are training our team to go out and get the daunting but very critical and valuable interaction with real users. And finally, we're going to use templates and some more time box sessions to help make sure our content is in good shape and usable and make some decisions about where we are going to do next. Now, that's going to be the day 5 stuff. And we'll take this anatomy in the content that follows and see how it works out for the 4 sprint types of sprint that we have actually talked about. So that's all for this particular session on creating a day-by-day plan. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back. Now, in this lecture, we'll go through an overview of problem scenarios sprint. Now, this deals with a critical area where we find out who our user is, what makes them tick, and what do they really care about. Therefore, the software we deliver is valuable to them, and it solves a job, a desire, and a habit that they have. Now, we're just going to go to run through this at a very high level and as a kind of preview of what's going to happen in the next module about the problem scenario sprint. Now, obviously, the concepts that will be important are personas, and drafting them, including think, see, feel, do, will also be part of that. Now, problem scenarios, the structured idea about what actually delivers and what kind of jobs and habits and desires they currently have at present. And then drafting the interview guide. And of course, we will end up writing user stories at the end as it will be all sprints. So that's a critical skill set. And then in module 2 of this course, we're going to talk about practice of going out and finding subjects and interviewing them. And so on day 0, probably the single biggest thing is getting a whole business thing about getting subjects. Having a stronger screening process, who are these people, what motivates them, how will we get them within our interview technique and get them to practice what we need them to. That's probably the most important thing on the preparation for this sprint. The brief, what's the input into this sprint? What are we inputting? How do we create a charter and success definition that's actionable, variable, that our team can understand? Basically, we'll see that we'll have this basic syntax that we see here. Thus, we want to know how certain persona or segment does this certain thing in this problem area fill out. And we want to do that because we have some sort of idea, probably something we'll do with software to make it better. And we deliver these certain things that'll help us do that. Now, early on at HVAC in a hurry, when they're still learning about what it means to make our technicians more effective at software, a good charter with sufficient abstraction and specificity might be relatively general, but we want to know how HVAC technicians prepare for and complete jobs. Now, it's pretty general in a way, but that's always something that you can deal with because they start here. And they do this because they want to understand the company's learned best practices and exploit opportunities for the technicians to encapsulate those into software and operationalize them. And then they'll deliver personas, problem scenarios, and some preliminary user stories. Therefore, they'll ensure that we have a good, clear view of who these people are, what makes them tick, and then they'll drive some idea on what software could look like. Even if they're going to go for it and do another sprint, they want to ensure that they're constantly thinking about where we're going to go with this, how we're going to go to execute this understanding we have just acquired. So here's another brief where the HVAC in a hurry team is later on in the game. Note these are not just things that we do at the beginning, then check the box and they're done. Now there are things we come back to whenever we have this sort of specific sprint related questions. We may now find that they want to learn all about how these guys and women technicians go out and get replacement parts for jobs, and how technicians work with the central office, their support system, and how do they actually go through that process. How does it actually work? Because they want to look at whether they can automate software friendly things. The general output metrics are the same. Now, Yaksha Quiz is a startup we've been playing with in our example, and maybe a charter for them. Well, we want to learn how companies hire engineers, screen or do their preliminary screening around these kinds of hard skills of engineering topics. Since we think that there may be an opportunity to introduce a quizzing system that will motivate HR managers to assist with this process and get better results for everyone, including candidates. Now, these are some examples of how briefs could look on day 1. As discussed before with personas and problem scenarios, we're going to push ourselves to see what we understand and know, where we want to get to do all these materials and what we're going to create. We're going to draft personas and problem scenarios from what we know, and we'll build an interview guide and we'll practice it. And then we'll arrange logistics to send everyone out to talk to actual users in the next few days. And we'll be doing our user interviews, talking to real customers, making notes, taking notes of our insights on day 2, 3, and 4. And then on day 5, we'll return to the office and actually share those things. We're going to do structured sessions to assess what we have learned, encapsulate it, ensure those transcripts are highly accessible, and something we can look back on in 30, 90, or 180 days, and then drive some real success and user stories. Now, what have we learned if we wrote software next week that could very well write what could our user stories be? What could we implement based on what we learned? And that way, we end up winding our sprint across that entire time period. Now, that's all for this particular lecture, everybody. Go through this once more. If you have any questions, you can send them to me directly. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back to this particular course. Now in this video, we're going to have a motivation sprint overview. We take our value propositions here and structure them as testable assumptions. And then we think about ways to figure out at least cost to delay if the user is really motivated to use our solution. Now, is it better enough to use it in that alternative to solve the problems, the jobs they have? How do we find out if it's valuable enough for them without spending a lot of time building a bunch of software that they really don't want? Now let's have a quick overview of how it looks. One of the key concepts we're going to use, and this is very popular and very well put together, set of work around lean startup. Originally outlined in Eric Ries's same name book, we would cover evidence-based innovation using scientific method to eliminate the uncertainty of testing propositions and have a good systematic way of going through these stuff so we know where we are and what we don't know. And we learn how to select vehicles, kind of typical vehicles which are well established as ways to run these tests to access motivation. Now we will discuss about the motivation sprint, and as always, we'll drive the user story so we'll see where we are and if we had to implement software, what we'd actually do. We constantly anchor the actions ability of these outputs. The highlights are kind of learning about lean startup and evidence-based innovation. And the vehicle, the kind of practicalities of structuring these experiments and achieving results. Now, while this idea is relatively new, that's really a good, well-established body of work to do things that actually work and things that don't work. So you'll have a comparison down the middle and how to figure out which one works best for our situation. Now, the brief may look like this, but we want to unpack and detail this basic assumption that if we do anything, whatever our proposal is for this persona, we're going to serve, or maybe it's a segment. Then we'll respond to it in a certain way. They'll use this ID product, which we'll roll to them. They will buy and pay for the service and subscribe over time. Now, whatever the relationship we seek to have with the client and we want to do, because we want to decide whether building such an initial software deliverable would likely be of real value to this persona which we are looking at. And our deliverables will be structured experiments where we went and found out. Now, results from these experiments and insights, conclusions one way or the other about what we think will be valuable to users so that we don't run off and build something nobody wants. Now, here's an example of how it might look at HVAC in a hurry. Now, look at it this way. If we offered HVAC tech as application to check parts, availability, and price, they will use it and improve their job performance. And we want to assess this to see if they want to build the app. And here's an example of how we might look at Yaksha Quiz. We would like to figure if we gave HR managers we made the quizzing service available, would they actually go ahead and use it or not? So they'd pay for it. And would it produce better results so that we don't get people to buy it and try it because it sounds interesting, but it doesn't really do anything, such that they keep seeing and then go ahead and unsubscribing. So it's kind of counterproductive. And we want to figure that out so we can see that we should drive to an initial version or rescrub our proposal and think about something else. So we don't spend their time and money on something that nobody wants. And as we go through this, the day one activity will warm up on most of these concepts of lean startups. Therefore, structuring assumptions, structuring experiments, ranking which idea we think are best to go out and do the experiment. Now, days 2 and 4 will be about running these experiments, and day 5 is about looking at results, finding out what they mean and what they tell us, drafting user stories, and then determining what our next step should be. Have you found something valuable and should drive forward or test another proposal and maybe run another sprint or even peel back the onion to ensure our problem still exists? On day 5, we will make the assessment and figure out what to do next in the next iteration. So that's all there was for this particular session. Thanks a lot for watching along with me. As usual, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching all my videos so far, and thanks a lot for logging on. Now let's talk about the usability sprint in this session. Here we look at our user stories and prototypes and maybe at initial implementation through the prototype. Now if you make them interactive, we'll learn how to do that. We'll probably serve us well, particularly if you're in the early phases. Thus we'll have those, and then we look at a very particular clinical type of research, design, or experimentation design, which is designed to test usability. Now we test if our user is motivated in the motivation sprint. Here we test, have you provided them affordances that allow them to accomplish whatever they think that they want to achieve. We will just have an overview of what happens when we go through the module in more detail. Now we'll have new concepts in the prep part, some ideas about structured views of user experience, user cognition, and conducting usability research. Now it sounds very formal and like a big deal, but the whole point here is that there's a collection of practices here that's accessible to anyone. And it's much easier to do some testing, even if it's not perfect and it's just the way we might or might want some expert would actually suggest how it actually should be. Now, it's better to do that than not, and we're going to learn how to do it effectively in 5 days. Now, let's know about applied usability testing. Now, here's 0-day stuff about learning these new concepts. And another important part of that prep is getting subjects. We'll have covered that in the problem scenario sprint, but many of the same practices will still apply. We will screen people and bring them in, etc. So we will still follow our predefined process. Now, the brief will look like this. We want to assess the user's relationship to available affordances and their appropriateness to whatever side of user stories we're going to test. And by affordances, we'll talk more about this term, where we say what the interface looks like and why we want to ensure our approach is usable. Therefore, we can assess that very quickly and see if users can understand it and find it very easy and appealing to use our software. Or if it gets confusing for them and they find it very difficult to use. And it's cheap to do what early, and it's very expensive and very potentially fatal to do that too late. So we learn how to do this in design sprint quickly and quite easily. Now here's an example of what brief at HVAC in a hurry might look like. Now similar to what you saw, their entire idea is to give themselves time to iterate a bit. They find out they have usability issues. Same general idea with Yaksha quiz. We will introduce these ideas to our team on day one, assuming they're new and we haven't done this sprint before. We will be writing these test plans and testing the test plan internally. Because one of the things we will learn is that this infrastructure is a little less forgiving than the infrastructure we will use to do customer discovery interviews. We ask the subject a question which they don't understand. We just repeat it. But if the prototype or software is in the wrong state or the test sort of goes sideways, it's much harder to recover from that than the discovery interview itself. So we will learn how to prep the infrastructure and make sure it's good so that we don't waste time with these hard to go subjects. Now on days 2 and 4, we will run the plan with real users and see how they react in a very structured way that's highly actionable for us and our team. And then on day 5, we will review that, ensure it's all packaged up so that if you look back at it in 90 days, it still makes sense to us and we can refer back to it. It's an asset that benefits the team over time, and we will write some stories and some new wireframes to find out where we are and how to incorporate what we have learned into a better, more valuable product version. And we will find out our next steps. Now that's the basic arc of the usability sprint, and I think you'll really enjoy it and find it very easy to enhance your entire usability as part of your project. So that's all for this particular lecture as a part of week 1. Thanks a lot for watching. I will see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back. In this session, we're going to learn how to run a problem scenario sprint. We'll go out, talk to real users, and find out what's on their list A, and how we're going to deliver something valuable to them. We roughly go through the process we see here. We have some questions that a persona problem scenarios can answer. This may be a new persona, if this is our first run at the design sprint, or it may be an existing persona. We're going to do some drafting, find out an interview guide, go out and do interviews, perhaps do some revision while we're doing that, and then we're going to test our understanding by writing user stories, driving to some ideas about working software that we could actually implement. At the end, we'll find out whether we're in good shape or have some more research to do, and then we'll have our answer one way or the other about what our next steps are. We can say a day in the life down here, but this is kind of an enhancement to the personas that we can optionally do. Now, we may think we didn't learn how to go out and get subjects in college. It wasn't our major area of study, and we think the reason for that and the reason why we may see this coming up in the MOOC and somewhere else if our job has a focus on innovation. The reason is we talked about the importance credited to innovation as a core company activity and the progress of design education, and the availability of that content in our previous sessions. All those things, they're playing catch up. And this skill will help us on a lot of our projects and in our career in general. We're now going to learn who these personas are and how to get them to do an interview around this day 0 point or day 0 point. Because we're going to be doing interviews with our teams on day 2, 3, and 4. And we probably can line up the subjects quickly if you start only identifying who they are and how we're going to get them on day 1. Now, if this is our very first design sprint, we might be wondering, wasn't this supposed to have figured them out here and then go and find them and interview them? Wasn't there supposed to be like a chain of successive events that were supposed to happen? And the answer is we should either make a best guess about who they are and start trying to find them, or get them lined up for interviews here. Or we truly feel like we must work with our team on that to even have an idea about who the persona is, because this is a greenfield project. Now, what we may want to do is take part of that session one more and move it into earlier sessions to get warmed up on it. Let's now talk about how to go and actually get these subjects. We can hire an agency, and they're going to be a little expensive though, and they may be getting us pseudo-professional subjects which aren't representative. We hesitate to say there's no better way to do this, and it's kind of uneven. Now, we may have to be uneven like a salesperson at figuring out where we're going to find these subjects and how we're going to get them. And it's important to willing to try multiple things and to walk up to strangers and talk to them or send them emails. Now, if you're familiar with the sales process or we've ever been around it, we know that there's a funnel. Hence, maybe one way to look at this is we create a funnel of subjects that we hit up to see if we can interview them, and then we find out how we're going to get enough of them to show up where our team's going to be actively engaging interview subjects. So let's talk about that process. Now, the beginning of the funnel, or the top of the funnel as it's called, the subjects we contact is our widest part of our funnel. Let's say we go to some place where we're going to find subjects. We'll talk about where that might be. But let's say we can approach, 12 people in an hour, and let's say that 30% of them respond. They don't run away from us and they actually pass our screener. Now, if you remember, that's an accurate question which makes sure that even though we have got past this difficult moment with them, that they're actually a good subject for us to talk to. They're representative of our persona. Let's say that 30% if you talk to 12 people an hour, and if you're down to 4 people per hour that actually pass our screener and are willing to talk to us, then let's just say not all those people are going to show up. That's a reality. Let's say 50% of them show up. Then that's 2 people per hour net, and then we're getting, and that means we should plan on around 30 minutes of time per subject. Now, this is going to be enormously dependent on who our subjects are, where we go. But the reality is it does take some time to do this. We'll be able to tune our own funnel and basically fine tune it to a point where we get a sense of how much time it takes to us to approach these people and actually get them on board. But we should perhaps assign something roughly this amount of time for getting each subject. So there should be, let's say, a net time for getting each subject, right? So now let's talk about what it's like, because the reality is it's the emotional part of talking to a stranger and getting them on board and not having them totally lose it on you. So that's probably the hardest part of the early phrase here. Now, we go up to somebody in a venue, on the street, kids pickup, medical office, wherever it might be. We're going to find these subjects. And they think, why is this random person just walking up to me and talking to me, right? And the next step we would recommend is to say, hey, we're doing product research, blah, 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 on something or the other. Why would you like to answer some questions? So that's kind of a weird situation for a stranger. Now, that is not immediately going to make them our best friend. But at least they'll understand that this person isn't trying to do something crazy, like, recruit me for a cult. And they're not trying to sell me something which I don't want. And they're actually doing research for something technical or a product research. So they might think, okay, I can talk to this guy. So then we're going to put our screener to them. Hence, we've gone past this difficult moment or the ice-breaking moment. But we're going to ask them in a natural way. Hey, we're doing this product research and we're looking for people who might be willing to talk to us. Would you be able to answer this question? How many times last week, let's say, did you chew gum, for example, or whatever it is? And they may ask us to get out, and that's going to happen. And that part of the process, which honestly will make you unhappy, but you should try to get used to it and it'll all be fine. So, and finally, you kind of tell them, hey, could I email you, or we'll actually set this up? Can we have a meet, or can we have a focus group? Can I make you part of a bigger group? We'll talk about that follow-up in the next session. And then hopefully we'll have a larger percentage of these people show up for us. Now, in this session, we looked at the basics of going out, getting ready, and approaching subjects. And in the session that follows, we'll go downstream about how to get these people set up for interviews that are valuable, that your team can actually go talk to them. So that's all for this session. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the session on setting up interviews. By now, we know the importance of subjects in design sprints. In this session, let us learn to find these subjects and the way to approach them. Now, the number one rule is to follow the activity of interest and approach our users or customers. Now, there are some definitive benefits from that. One is when we approach them, it's going to be less weird, and number two is we discussed about how many people we can approach per hour. Definitely, when we are at an event or a venue where there are more people rather than our screener, obviously our numbers are going to go way up. So, for example, if you're building an app for parents to distribute allowances to kids, we're allowed to go to a kid's sporting event, playing field, or a little league game. If you're building a dating app, then you probably have to actually find the bar district where young singles actually hang out. So the basic idea is to go where people do an activity to increase our efficiency. Now, we should prepare ourselves to try out multiple things. One thing is to create diversity in our subject pool. And number two is to find out some of the things that just work better than others. Now, the most important thing while deciding about the number of persons to talk to is to make sure we get some type of convergence or repetition of the answers from our subject. And there's no hard and fast rule to do that. But in common parlance, if it's a consumer product or a brand new thing, the good convergence would be to talk to the order of, let's say, 42 or 60 subjects. Now, if you find this extremely difficult to do, that's fine. At any time, one subject is infinitely better than zero, and we should do as many as we can. Now, for business products, it's great if you can find a specific venue like an industry event, a conference, or a happy hour or something. We can also search job descriptions in LinkedIn, which will work pretty well. It is definitely important to go and approach people in person, but for a business product, we can try sites like LinkedIn, search by title, and need to talk to fewer people. Now, for a business product, we can talk to less subjects. If it's 40 for consumer products, 20 to 30 should be sufficient for business ones. Now, if you're carrying out an internal ID projects, obviously things are easier for us because people work in our same company. The main thing is to avoid talking only to managers. I mean, if we have to talk to them, and it's important, but we probably have to convince them to talk to people so that we can understand them better and do a good job with the software. We should ask and observe even the minute details. So it's not like we have to tell the manager they didn't know enough. We're just saying we need to observe things in a hands-on way. Now, once we have made contact with these subjects, in some cases, we have time to sit down and interview them right on the spot, which is perfect and great. But most often, we meet people telling that they have some 20 to 45 minutes to sit down and talk to us. So in those cases, we probably have to follow up with them with an email. You can see a template on the screen, which is a lesser materials about following up. Now, key things to increase our rate of response in emails is to make sure to include a link of our company so that they know that we're from a legitimate place. Explain to them about the work that you're doing and tell them specifically what information that you're looking for. Then tell them about the incentive to compensate them for being so generous with their time and providing us that vital information. Now, we want to interview people in person. So if it's an app for parents to, let's say, distribute allowances for their kids, ideally we will have to interview them in their kitchen and also see the notes on the refrigerator and watch them interfacing with their kids. Now, if it's too hard, we have XC2, which means to interview people in their office or some mutual place and not to interview them where they do their activity. That's okay, and that's perfectly manageable. Next is through video calls or video screen sharing or actually having a telecon, which are not really great, but they're certainly better than to have actually nothing at all. Then we have voice calls, which are marginally better than nothing because we will lose many of the cues of body language and circumstances which are really important to track and navigate through. So that was a brief idea to decide the venue, and we have to think about when we design our follow-up, which will definitely work. We can also see what people are willing to do, what we and our team can manage from a time point of view. We will get us set up so that we get lots of subjects in the right place, but always remember, everything we do here will help us to drive our projects to a more valuable outcome. So if you can't find these people or you don't feel like you have to do all of these, always do the best that you can or see the method that works the best for you. Talking to real users is always infinitely more valuable than just talking internally amongst your own group or amongst your own colleagues. So that's all for this particular session, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back. Now in this session, we're going to discuss about the interviewing subjects. Here's a checklist of things to make sure we are prepared for interviewing our subjects. The first thing we need to make sure that we've got those screen subjects as we have been talking about, and then we want to have the interview guide. We have previously discussed on how to prepare interview guides. Now we didn't make sure that we have an intro script. Here we want to thank the user, explain what the research is all about, and explain to them that they're not here to judge them or evaluate them. We're just trying to learn about whatever it is we're learning about. Remember, if there's a question about confidentiality, about what we are doing, then we probably didn't even really need to get in that with the users. Remember, we have discussed about how the yellow Walkman problem, where we don't want to put the solution in front of the users, and we are just here to talk about the problem. Then we want to explain how their information will be used, and also want to make sure that we are clear with them about the compensation, how that would work. In case if we really need a paperwork-like release, then we want to have that obviously prepared and ready to go. If you're not using their names or recording them, or using any of this material in a public way, then we may find that we don't need a release. Now, these are going to depend on what our subjects are or what the geography we are in. So we must also check with a few of other things. We want to have our notes and recording ready, then subject may involve with a couple of other things. The first is, there's a form to take notes in Appendix A of the Google document. It says notes for field interviews. We shall have a few of those tables copied out, and that is ready to go. Hence, we are not fiddling with it in front of the subject. It would be better if we take down notes on our computer. It allows us to be much more focused on what is going on with the interview. We can also record as long as we have had their agreement, and this might work. But we may find that we have trouble finding the time to go back and listen to what the whole recording again and transcribe it. If you're going to do the day in the life of following up, which involves getting photos back from them, then we want to make sure that we have squared away with regard to our paperwork. We're really focused on this part of our product or feature hypothesis, where we're trying to learn these specific things. The reason why we're making this distinction is that we're going to look at the value hypothesis when we go to the motivation sprint. In case if we bleed any of that material into this activity, then we're going to end up with a yellow Walkman problem. The punchline of this story is that we ask people if they like our hypothetical product, and they're always going to say yes. But they're going to start to tell us probably what they think that we want to hear or what we don't really want to hear. We need to use a nice solid interview guide like this. We have learned how to do the interviewing in course 1, and we want to move from very general things and questions, and that will now lead to relatively more specific questions. This is how we get a good interview and the response that have a high degree of evidentiary value. If you get a specific response for general question, that is the major problem, and that is valuable to hear. The most important thing is we're getting ready for our session. To have this in order and always practice. We probably should practice at least 1, 2, 3, or these, even 4 interview ourselves so that we can be a good coach to our team on how to actually do this. In this session, we have gone through how to actually conduct these subject interview sessions. It is a very new type of skill, but we think it will be really valuable to us in our career. This will be valuable only if you give it a little bit of practice and bring home some valuable insights. Later on, we can implement these in our project. So that's all there is for this particular session. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back to the session. In this session, we're going to look through a few final notes on getting ready for our role as a sprint lead for the problem scenario sprint. This is our checklist, and we have already gone over this in our previous module. Here we have to give a little more attention towards our subjects. The material that is preceded are getting the Google Doc prepped so that there are specific places. We would probably use the heading 3 for creating specific workspaces in all of the pertinent sections. So, problem scenarios, personas, interview guides, and field notes for each of our sprint participants is created. This way, the sprint participants will know where they must put their work, and all in one case in case of showing to them. Now, those are probably the main things beyond the general items we have been over. As we get ready for our sessions, we should prepare to spend a little bit of time on a few of these. Days by converging the material that our team generates. For instance, on day 1, we shall draft a bunch of things and we shall do some convergent activities together. We should probably be ready to stay and help in doing the final conversion by editing it. Particularly, the interview guides are going to be something that our team will need as they go out on a day-to-day or even do maybe 2 to 4 interviews a day. Now on day 4, we're going to come back and review our transcript notes. We shall probably stay a little bit extra on day 4 to converge that, and the likewise we'll do on day 5. We're going to have our final outputs. We shall do convergence as a team, but we're definitely going to have some final editing and organizing everything to do as a sprint lead. Now in case we are from the week existing from sprint lead, then it's okay to wait a day or maybe 2 days. We must highly encourage to converge the material and make sure that it's all put together soon. We're actually going to feel a little bit tired and it's going to be fresh on our mind. In case if we need clarification on something that is missing from one of our sprint participants, then it should be fresh in their minds. We should be more than willing and we should be able to go get the clarification, and we must make sure that we don't lose the valuable asset that's been acquired. The things that we want to watch out for as we are running the internal sessions are the distractions. Email, texting, things like writer's block, and just fatigue in general. We must not underestimate how novel and how hard it is to work this way. We're going to do things that are very different than our regular day-to-day work with our teammates. The things that will help us are working in these small batches and these small time box sessions by making sure there are a lot of examples available. And there are examples available in the supporting materials and the core materials that's on the template itself. So people have moments when they're able to present what we have, and they stay focused on that moment as they have plenty to show, and they're toiling away over their work. And then people usually don't skip on the breaks as they obviously would need them, right? So this is harder than just sitting at our desk and making things work on a day-to-day basis. This is a very intensive kind of work, and it will very quickly fatigue people. Hence, people need plenty of breaks that will be helpful. So we are facilitating the sessions. This is helping our team and attention provider learning about how to use think, see, feel to focus the personas. On the think side, we want to really help them focus on the tension between how does this persona want things to be versus how they are right now. This one focal point is really helpful. We don't usually run into specific problems with C's, but we run into this all the time with fields. We want to watch out for the field aspect as a synonym for think. Here we come through a small bad instance on the screen. Trent feels that he spends too much time in traffic, so this means he thinks he spends too much time in traffic, but this is still essentially a cognitive kind of activity. Hence, this is not really the best example. A good example of a real feel item would be Trent feels frustrated when he's sitting in traffic trying to get a job. These instances help us in improving our learning process as initially as we will have some issues. We must adopt a few more goes with the right emphasis, the right example, and the right iterations. Finally, with do's, we must focus on the quantitative dimensions. So with HVAC, we have to go through how many jobs they do per week, how many hours do they spend on the road, how many hours are gullible, and then other notable behaviors like gosh. We must also go through, do they actually use their personal iPhone to look up documentation, or just other things that will help to draw out or suppose about these personas as to propel themselves for learning. Now we have learned a few things about how to get ready for this problem scenario sprint. We should learn a lot of great things that will help us to drive more valuable software, and it's only going to take a week. So that's it for this particular session. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. In this session, we're going to look through the running day 1 of our problem scenario sprint. Now, the inputs into this are the sprint checklist that we have previously discussed with a particular importance as prescribed to getting subjects. Now, lining them up and making sure we are ready to teach that skill set to our team. Then our outputs from day one here are going to be a bunch of drafts and a working version of our interview guide. Here we're going to go out and actually get them talking in real users, be it those buyers or users of our product. Now in the AM, we're going to introduce these concepts with the slides that are supplied in the session. So we're going to draft personas. In the afternoon, we're going to do some storyboarding, work on those interview guides, and then do some mock interviews to warm up to get ready. Now both must be a little more prepared when they go talk to real subjects, and also bring their anxiety level down a little bit while this process of interviewing users. So the agenda is that we're going to be managing this, and we want to start by explaining our role. The role are to be a facilitator and kind of an editor, because we're producing a lot of material. We're going to make some final decisions in the interest of time to bring things together and edit them. If you in case feel more nervous than you want a crutch, we find that a fake Australian accent strikes a nice balance between making ourselves approachable and friendly. By showing that we are there, we mean business and we are authoritative. If you see the first item here, we're going to have these concepts and warm-up exercises. So this is supported by the slides, and we shall find that in lesson materials. Now in the output here, primarily we will have a bunch of ideas on personas. And here in this next section, this is where we start to get into more of our editor and our facilitator role. We're going to take all those roles, going to overlap properly, and then we're going to exit with a converged list of which personas or problem scenarios that we think are most important. Now this is all that we actually get here. Then we should take a complete break. Now, after taking the break, we're going to pair up our collaborators. It's a matter of those folks' view and how they will work best together. Now when people collaborate, they become more ready and sorted, and going forward they get a chance to work together with each other in a relatively structured environment. This is very helpful and valuable. Now we're going to divvy out the personas so that each of them are going to start drafting personas. It is good when we have the overlap. We're going to do a diverge and a converge. We're going to generate a lot of these converges and consider the best. Now most of the focal items blend them together, and we're going to help facilitate that. So through these exercises, they're basically going to be at drafting personas in the way that we had discussed in course 1. There are sort of two ways that we can run this pairing. One is, what is suggested here, where there is person A and person B in a pair. Person A and B both kind of work, then they take time when they see this, like right here on the screen. They read each other's personas and discuss them. They're periodically doing this. Another way is a tighter pairing where one person writes and the other person talks. So this works well too. This is a matter for personal preference and what we think is going to work best. The first method that is laid out is probably the safest, if this is our first go around. Now the active pairing can be kind of awkward if you're going to do it for the first time. So we have to feel free to try that if you would like, but we may find this way a little bit easier. Now let's discuss drafting the persona. This is going to be a relatively long block of time, that's 15 minutes, and this is going to be a new thing for a lot of people. Just sitting down and imagining what this user might be like. So, we have some focal questions that we use to think through this persona. We might want to put these up on a slide or write them on the whiteboard, or why do they do this thing should be our area of interest. Like work on etchwax or quiz people, or go on dates, whatever your topic is. Why do they do this? What's the story of how they came to do this, and how they've been doing? What are the sort of big events? Day in a life is good, so they get up in the morning and what happens? What's the first thing they do? And then, how do they go through their day? That's another good one to start. Just think through it if you're struggling to write up a persona. Finally, where they're headed. Where do they want to go with this activity? What does it mean to them? Where are they now versus where they would have liked to be? And what would they like to try out? That's a good sort of finishing component. So if they're having trouble putting pen to paper, or maybe we go around and coach them individually, there's a good set of questions to help them think about the persona. Again, we're going to be in a position of doing a lot of diverge, converge things where people generate a lot of material. Later, we work together to converge it into a single thing. Now, it's a really valuable skill, but for most of us, it will probably be a kind of a new skill. And as we get into the afternoon here, we're going to do the same kind of drafting with the problem scenarios and alternative pairs by keeping them in those same pairs that they're in. And then, we have a block of time for the peers to work together on converging their personas and their problem scenarios into a single item. And we get into the afternoon. So let us go through the afternoon agenda. We're going to do that before and after storyboards. We shall find some examples for this too, but this is really a good way to think through the problem scenario and in what does the customer's life look like now. What are the sort of key things we're going to try and understand? How are we going to change that? And what do we think this life would look like after? And this is a good way to put the personas into motion to make them more kinetic, make them more real, and again, just push everybody to really think about who this user is. Now let us see what is valuable to them and what we want to find out when we go talk to them in the coming days. And if you remember, it's really handy to have some kind of screen sharing thing that everybody's logged into, already set up. So that way they don't have to come and plug in their computer, although these storyboards would be done on pencil and paper. So that doesn't apply here. Nevertheless, it's good to have that set up so that they're sharing their personas and so forth. they're screen sharing. So they're going to divvy out these personas. We would repair everybody at this point just for diversity, but that's completely up to us. In case we don't want to risk the repairing, you can just keep them. Now, if you think the pairs are working well and it's not complicated enough, it's kind of not essential. And then they're going to use the interview guide template draft, the persona questions, and then each pair will do mock interviews and then they will switch places. So about 10 minutes on each side. Now, we may find that we need more time for this. And if you do take the time as we go through these items, then generally we want to be flexible on the agenda. So if you're running a little over, we must not rush to decide certain things that we can just skip. But on the individual items, we should be relatively tight on time. Now, for instance, we would say to everybody that we're going to have 10 minutes on each side to do these mock interviews. In case if we find that they're needing more time, then it's better to allocate it at the end of the exercise, and we're going to take 5 more minutes on this. Now, we don't want to have a period where a few people need more time and everybody else is done, because this is kind of idling and losing momentum. So it's better to avoid things. So we finish these mock interviews, then we probably want to give them a break, and then we're going to converge the material and prepare for the field work. So this is a really big block where we are at and how successful these other converges are going to be. We also discussed on what should drive our decision about how we kind of divvy out these convergence tasks. So the idea is to end up keeping everybody's work somewhere in an appendix. So this is a good place to put it, but we should end up with a single set of relatively mutually exclusive personas, problem scenarios, and especially most importantly, the interview guide. Now, this is what our team's going to be needing in about days 2 to 4 as they actually go out and do interviews. Later, we want to make our final preparations so that everybody knows where they're going and what they're going to be doing exactly. Hence, we have just finished your first day of being a design sprint lead. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot and welcome back. Now in this session, we're going to look through running days 2 to 4 of the problem scenario sprint. During the days from 2 to 4, we are going to be doing our interviewing users. Now there are various items that is in our input like drafts and the interviewing guide as we see on the screen on day 1. And the output is going to be the interview transcripts and incredible insights. So this is valued by the users. Now the day 4 is actually a split day. So in the AM, probably we'd plan to still be out interviewing people. Whereas in the PM, we will be back converging our material and taking our final steps. Now, these are the couple of things that are needed to be done in this particular session. In case if our team needs to be out in with the subjects in various places, personally, they would not make them come into the office. So we could just make sure that they know how to get where the users are going to be at that time and then get them paired up. The users have their game plan for this, but one thing we may want to do is on a system like Slack or an email list or something is that we may want to have people who will respond with a little template. Now, we must look through how many people, who did the interview today, and what are my top 5 things that we learned. This process will just keep the energy level and the motivation level up. They will feel like they're not just out there by themselves. This may help you to just get the process moving along a little bit. If they get into problems, then they can write back to each other. Now, we've already discussed this, but Appendix A of the Adventure Design template has a set of places to write up our notes that is readily sortedly prepared. We can record them at any place as long as we make sure that we could cover these items. Now, as our team is filling this, we can make sure that we have a setup like Google Documents. In this Google Documents, where we are able to see this data actually come in and flow into the doc. We want to make sure that the notes are detailed, that they're making notes on their insights to push themselves. This is really especially important because we can get tired out there. In case if they're not pushing ourselves to really ask what are they learning, then we are not going to do super critical things such as tweak the interview guide based on what are learning and change our interview techniques. So we get these certain things versus others on the last thing we want to do. So just run through the interview guide and then you call it. Now, we're here to learn stuff, so we need to push ourselves on what we are really learning. So there are just things that we might not want to keep an eye on as our team is out there doing this. And we may want to call the users up and coach them a little bit in case we see that it's not going quite the way that we'd like. Maybe a hangout or a virtual meeting of some type at the end of the day or the beginning of the day is a better way for coaching things to the users. But overall, this is going to be time consuming, stressful, messy for everybody. We want to generate a minimum of additional overhead on them as they're out doing these things for us. So this is running from days 2 to 4. So let's see what happens in the PM of day 4 as we bring back our findings in our next session. We shall also discuss about what we have learned from the next team. So that's it for this particular session, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot and welcome back. Now, in this session, we're going to look through running day 4 of the problem scenario sprint. During the afternoon of day 4, we're going to come back to the office, get together with all these awesome insights you've had about the users. We're going to go through what their life is like and what is valuable to them. We will also be going through our top learnings. Now, we're going to clean up the transcript so that the super valuable asset that we went through all this trouble to create is durable for the 30, 90, and 180 days. And later, we could look back on it and it should actually make sense. Now we're going to converge our personas and problem scenarios with some edits based on what we learned. So let's take a look at the agenda. The first thing we're going to do is that everybody's going to write down their top 5 learnings on these white post-its. Then in ranked order, we need to put them on the wall. Everybody's going to loop through and explain them. Now let us assume that here we had a team of 6 people and we need to calibrate this time a little bit based on the size of our team. Then we're going to use these sticker dots, which we discussed about in the previous session. So here we need to use, everybody's going to get a set of these little sticker dots to place on the post-its that they think represent the most important learnings. So step 1 is that we tell everybody about how many sticker dots they should take. Now one way of allocating them is 1/3 plus 1. So if we had 3 people, 15 learnings in total, then that will have 5 plus 1 equals 6 sticker dots. Hence everybody else takes 6 sticker dots. Step 2 is to go put the dots on the learnings that you think are the most important. Place the dot on learnings, and that is not some kind of weird dictatorship for life, but is a kind of an election or something. Now, the point is not to validate certain insights and invalidate others. The point is usually that there will be certain ideas that have a lot of sticker dots that which are being placed on. Now, we're going to pair up everybody once again. They're going to spend time reviewing on each other's transcripts so that they make sure that they understand everything. There is some time allocated for review of those and cleanup. This is going to seem a little tedious to everybody, but this is really important because of previously discussed, if you're taking nice detailed notes, that's really important, then this material may look really different to us in 30, 90, or 180 days. Things that we thought were not particularly important at the time may turn out to be super important. And we don't want to have to run a whole design sprint if we actually learn those things. And even if we do want to run another design sprint, then we want to make sure that we are benefiting from all the material that we worked hard to go out there and acquire. Then what you will do is to divvy out the various personas that we created on day 1 and run revisions of whatever the team thinks should be changed. And then we shall do the same thing with the problem scenarios. Hence, this is allocated. Everybody's going to get a specific one in their pair and work on it. For instance, if one person wants to work across a couple personas, then they must have some ideas. Later on, we can pair them and we can also cut this time in half. Again, this is not the perfect agenda, but it's a tested agenda. So when we make adjustments to it, then we have to make sure that we make them explicitly and everybody understands. We shall continue to use that technique of time boxing to keep everything on track. So that's it for this particular session, everyone. Thanks for logging on. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back. In this session, we're going to look through running day 5 of the problem scenario sprint. Now we're getting into this day 5 with learnings, transcripts by converged personas and problem scenarios. So we're going to exit this with nice cleaned up version of those ideas on propositions. What are we going to do for these users that really may be valuable? That's the question. Then regardless of what we're going to do, the motivation sprint next week to test those propositions, or going to pencil out some user stories and some wireframes. So even if you're going to do more design research, more testing, we're going to be really helped by going to the hoop and thinking about what this might look like in software. After all, it's our job to write valuable software. And we just want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the ball and that we're staying focused. So this is how it's going to look in the agenda as shown on the screen. So in the morning, we're going to pick our top problem scenarios and then we're going to lay those out with propositions against them. So as the sprint lead, what we must do here is to designate place where the problem scenario sits. So either we had to put them on a whiteboard or put them on post-its in different areas where people can see. Later, put these proposition post-its under those post-it tools. So we're going to have problems in some areas. We're going to have multiple ideas and propositions under problem from different people. And we're going to go through the sticker dot voting again and talk about why we think the certain propositions are better than others and what's important about them. Then we shall want to give everybody probably a break as shown in the activity column. Now we should take these uploaded proposition paired with the problem scenarios, divvy those problems out, pair people out, and go through and draft some epic user stories. What would the software look like that delivers this proposition that we decided about might be compelling? These are still in pairs here, and then converge them, and then we must allow 15 minutes or more depending on the size of our team in case, for the pairs to do a single representation of their epics and how they deliver on those various propositions. Now following that, we shall take those in the same pairs with the converged epics, and we would draft storyboards. We have discussed this in other sessions in pretty much a lot of detail. So we're going to consider an epic story, and we're actually going to sketch out a little panel of what we want to see is things happen over the course of that epic. Later we will review in pairs, update those, and then again, whether we may need to calibrate this a bit or we will just do pair presentations. Then we would get everybody lunchtime, and in the afternoon, we're going to take some of those same pairs. Now, in case if we find that mixing people up is working well, then we must go ahead and do that. Now, we're going to consider these epic stories or storyboards, and we're going to draft child story test cases. And then the peers will review, converge, and then we shall allocate some time to have a group discussion of these. Now, let us see, do these user stories make sense? How do we speak to the storyboard? What other ideas does a group have to make them better? Now, we can give everybody a break, and then the afternoon here, we're going to think about these stories. We're going to look at the UI patterns and comparable. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, basically, as we discussed. We want to think about what would be good as a UI metaphor that we could use to execute against these things. The UI metaphor that a user is going to understand must be executed. We're going to go and put those together in pairs, and that is what an item is going to be shown on the screen. Now, by following that, we're going to have a presentation and around the room discussion. This is a really good place if you have that screen sharing set up so people don't have to walk up and plug in their computers to a projector and so forth. Now, group discussion is very useful as everybody will have ideas for different comparable and other things like that. They're being seen out there like patterns, ideas, with other sites and applications that are really cool. Now, everybody uses different sites, watches different apps, and will know about different patterns. At the end of the day, we shall draft wireframes from these, then do a presentation and discussion around the room and what we should do next. Now, if we're obliged to start building software the next week and we don't have any choice, then this part can probably be a little bit shorter. Now, this is exactly how we're going to go into our sprint or after you finish course 3. And if we do have the discretion, then we decide what to do. We have gone from learning how to get subjects and interview them to planning and actually executing a perfect sprint. So that's all for this particular session. I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back. So in this session, we're going to know how to structure the value proposition and truly design them, how to decompose them into testable assumptions, and how to use best practices on testing motivation. So if you can remember this product, it could be a product feature, hypothesis slide, and this is where we slice these things together. Until now, we've been working on the personas and pairing of problem scenarios and alternatives. Now we're going to focus on this area of value propositions. If you can remember about these different hypothesis areas, we draw these sharp distinction between this area here, personas and problem scenarios, where we can go out and talk to subjects and ask them proper questions and basically validate and texture those hypotheses out and then value hypotheses where we cannot. Because if you recall, we have this yellow Walkman problem. We can ask them how many times a month do you go to the dentist? We can ask them how do you feel when you go to the dentist? But if we ask them, did you like this new toothbrush we're thinking of making? They will always tell us yes. And we learn nothing from that. In fact, it can be very destructive because we think we have a yes when we really don't. And this makes us create software or product which is not really valuable. So what to do about that and how do you go about it? Firstly, we start off with a well-organized idea about who this customer is and what the problems they have and what might be valuable. That's what we drove into the last sprint, and then we organized these ideas in testable hypotheses. Now, it sounds very challenging, but basically a hypothesis is just a testable statement. Then we think about ways that we can test that statement with experiments. And though that sounds elaborate, if we go to our superior and say we want to run experiments, they may say, we don't have the time for that. We'll talk about how to sell this stuff later. Now, there are a few basic practices and a few best practices that relatively standard practices about how to do this. We will learn how to do it in the package of a 1-week design sprint around motivation. Then we execute these experiments and we are driving to this moment where we either say we get to a result for our experiment, where we either say we are disproven this proposition of this idea and how the customer's environment is, or how they're going to behave is if we've got a fault and we need to revise and rethink what we're going to do and how we prove it. Now it looks good and we're going to take the next step. Now the idea of using scientific methods to thoroughly test propositions and driving to this pivot or persist moment comes from this body of work called the Lean Startup by Eric Weiss, which is a very important technique. If you're around high tech, you've probably heard of the Lean Startup, right? So if you've been around a technology company or worked in both before, you'll know about Lean Startup. Now, if you're in high tech, you've perhaps also heard of lots of the business trends and things, but in our opinion, this is not just a trend. Earlier, we talked about how companies are in the last 5 or 10 years have sort of widespread realization is that innovation is what drives value. And on a little bit of lagging basis, they're getting realized that techniques that they're used to scale our business and operate their businesses in a long-term steady state don't work really well for innovation. And as we've discussed, when we highly magnify people in organizations, they don't really like insecurity. They don't like something like ambiguity. So important thing about this approach of using the scientific method, which has been validated pretty well for lots of important things, is that it removes that ambiguity. It gives us a systematic approach to innovating which solves a very important problem that businesses are realizing they have. This approach works if it has structure, but it takes a little bit of practice and learning to execute this stuff, to explain it, and then introduce it to others as well. So we should learn more about that, but that'll be in our next session. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. Hi, and welcome back. So the stronger our ideas are about who the user is and what makes them tick and what's on their list A around the personas and the problem scenarios, the easier it is for us to drive to well thought out propositions on what's going to be valuable to them. And in this session, we should learn about taking those and texturing them out into testable formulations that we can then go and experiment against. Now we should look at some examples against the backdrop of the material that we've been learning about and we would have done in the problem scenario sprint. So we exit with a well-formulated version of this and a few ideas about value propositions. And as the HVACT moves forward, they also have the idea that maybe something that's truly valuable should be an automated system to look for part availability and cost so that it's easier for the HVAC technician to move their jobs forward and find out the next steps with the customer. Now, if you formulate that into a value hypothesis, we'll call this the core value hypothesis because this is a very simplified general view of this. It might look like something like we can see here on the screen. So, if we offer them, the HVAC technicians, an application to check this availability and pricing, they actually would either use it or would improve the completion time and customer satisfaction on their jobs. So this is as good as a start as any. So this is testable, but we're perhaps going to texture this out into a more detailed individual assumption so that they're easy to get at and think about specific vehicles so we can test it there as well. So here's an example of that. The first one is an idea about something we could do inside the company to see how interested the HVAC technicians are in using such a tool so that we could mail them and invite them to sign up to use the tool or perhaps give their input on the difficulty of getting parts in the field in a sort of a town hall meeting or something. And at least 20% would respond. We may or may not have a nice clear benchmark for that. If the management at a HVAC in a hurry regularly invites the HVAC technicians to sign up for things or come to certain meetings, then they probably wouldn't be able to standardize this pretty well. But what if we couldn't? What if they actually didn't do that? It's still important, it turns out in practice, to always start with a quantitative threshold. And the reason why that's important is that we know in theory, we could do our experiment a couple of times and find out what we want our baseline to be. But in practice, what will probably happen is that we will never set those thresholds and we won't be able to drive to the systematic view of what's a true result and what's a false result. Now, if you don't know where the baseline is, then it doesn't matter. But it does matter because as long as we set the baseline, we can always move it. So we could always not say we can change it. We could always say that we have one in mind as a focal point. Get to some results and then reevaluate it. Explicit and then explicitly leave it in the same or change it. But don't start out without one because what we'll do is find is that things are just all over the place and the experiments didn't really run well. Now the second thing here is that the formulation test we could recommend using initially as we create these assumptions. We can vary this and certain assumptions may need to be a little bit of a different formulation. But we include all those items and we can see them implemented here. So we'll make sure that we cover all the main bases about what we're talking about so that people can understand. And we'll make sure that the assumption is casual and testable. Now here's another example. This is a vehicle test that we can do. If we offer the technicians SMS-based service to whatever way, where they could just text a number, hey, I need this part, here's a photo of it, and here's a part number. Tell us whatever you want or tell us whatever you want. And basically, when there's a certain set of guidelines, why would they use that? And they wrote back on it, then it would actually help them to complete their job. So this is really a good way to create a product proxy or a lookalike, basically something that functions the same, but it's not exactly the same. So we don't actually go and invest all the money to build the software, but we create the experience for them and see what it's like for them, whether they care, whether they want to use it or not. And this is even more coming kind of close, hands-on version of that, where we sort of shadow the technicians and act like their security or assistant, getting the parts, calling up dispatch and figuring things out for them. This gives us a good sense of what they encounter, where do they need the kind of clerical help that would potentially be executed in a piece of software. Now, these are good generalized examples of how we might structure these assumptions. Let's take a look for Yaksha Quiz. We have this idea for a lightweight quizzing app that we think solves the problems about how HR managers screen candidates and how here they might break down into this core value hypothesis that if they offer this, then we HR managers do that and they would actually use it for a trial and adopt it. And after the trial, they would eventually also pay for it. So it's nice and testable. And if you broke that down, here's what the assumptions might look like. Since this is a product to the public, we might run ads on Google or tweets or post on LinkedIn forums for HR managers and we want to get 10% of those people to come to our landing page. Now, that's actually quite a lot, and rather we want to get to come to the landing page, and then 10% of those people will sign up to get an announcement. So here's another example. If we hand created the quiz, this is very similar to the vehicle that we talked about for HVAC in a hurry, and we'll definitely start to see some patterns that work for this stuff. So if we hand create the quizzes for an open position, they would use these and it would improve their outcomes. So here's another one. If we offer this to them and describe the service in a way that they would relate to, would they just go and buy it from us? So we've introduced the idea of creating testable assumptions, and we've shown you a couple of examples that built on the work that we did with personas and problem scenarios, and perhaps that first sprint around problem scenarios and personas. So we shall learn more, but that'll be in our next sessions. Thanks for logging on, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. In this session, we will learn about unpacking our assumption using the AIDAOR framework. Now, there are 6 steps that we have to do with the journey a customer takes from not knowing what our product or project is to becoming a happy customer user of it. The basic idea is that thinking through this journey is a good way to identify key assumptions. It is totally not the only way to do that. There's a lot of different things which might matter, but all projects have this in common to some extent, which means there is a user and they learn about our thing and they start using it. So we shall go through this to think through assumptions and also texture them out and really think about which ones are most critical. The basic idea of this framework is that the attention step. How do we get the attention of our user or customer? How do we engage their interests? What desire do they have that we pair with a meaningful proposition that they like and think will be valuable to them? Desire is always the least directly measurable, but the emotional drive keeps us going. Let us see what is that. It is action. This is a very important step that's regularly neglected. What exactly do we have to start using our product or our process? How do we minimize that? What do we need to test about that? Onboarding is everything that has to happen for them to become a regular full user of the product. For instance, with Facebook, that may be going and finding and connecting to their friends with a product like a CRM, like Salesforce. It might be getting our calendar on the system or our data in there, so that our sales manager goes and looks at Salesforce instead of mailing or calling us. Retention is a kind of universal for everything that happens once the customer is using the product. How does their current use of the product make them choose it more and more over time? How does that monetize for us and our company? How does it help with growth, for instance, and sharing? How much do they actually like the product? All these fall under retention. Now, we truly like to storyboard this because it helps us to think about what's going on with the customer. Where are they and when is this actually happening? What's within their mindset? What are the real circumstances of their journey with our product? If you're going to use Yaksha Quiz, our fictional company, which is doing a lightweight quizzing solution for companies that hire engineers, our character, Helen, the HR manager, sees a post on LinkedIn from a friend that says, "I use Yaksha Quiz, it was great." She clicks through and gets to a landing page for Yaksha Quiz that speaks to something on our list A, which is a better way to evaluate tech hires, and this engages her interest. Her desire is that she wants to be able to do more for this company that's got all this stuff going on. Hiring engineers is a key activity for them, and this is something that would make a real difference, she thinks. So she takes action and talks to the functional manager about trying this thing out. She signs up and then the onboarding process. The first key step there is that she creates a quiz that she can use to screen candidates. Otherwise, there's not going to be any action there. For instance, this would call out to the fact that as we instrument observation into our platform, we want to keep an eye on how do people sign up and then what has to happen for them to recreate their first quiz. Because if that doesn't happen, we know they're just not going to use the product. Then finally, retention is everything that happens after that. So here, hypothetically, Helen has become a happy customer user of the product, and she continues this cycle and shares it on LinkedIn about she actually using the product and how it's actually been working for her and helping her out. Now, that is one way to unpack our assumptions and think about what might be really crucial that we want to test about our idea, so that we can drive to value for the customers without creating any waste, both on the economic front and on the effort front. We shall learn more about this, and we shall learn about other topics in upcoming sessions. Thanks for watching this one. Hello and welcome back. Now in this session, we're going to learn about setting a systematic approach to innovation and taking ideas on what propositions are invaluable to the user and on pushing these into testable assumptions up into experiments that we can run in and around. The very best experiments on motivation are mostly things that we run in 48 hours or 2 days. Now, the idea of experimenting may be kind of challenging, but as we go through these ideas and some examples, we find that they're pretty accessible to us. Now, the concept that we'll start with is the idea of an MVP. And this also comes from the body of work around lean startup. And this stands for minimum viable product. Now, what does that actually mean? What do these letters mean? There are many misperceptions about what an MVP is. Hence, minimum means that it is the latest, fastest, least expensive way to validate or invalidate an important assumption, as we'll actually see that in a while. Now, this may or may not mean that it's an actual working product. Viable just means that we'll be able to deliver us a definitive result. And product is perhaps the trickiest part of the acronym here, because this doesn't essentially mean quote-unquote real software. Now, this could be an interactive prototype or the kind of product processes that we've been talking about. Now, for example, we talked about HVAC, right? HVAC, in a hurry, and the team there setting up a text message-based service to help technicians find out about the parts that they need. Now, that's called an MVP. Now, even though they basically don't have to build any new software to do that, they still have a proxy setup which can actually help them test their assumption. Now, going out with the technicians and acting as their assistant to learn about what's valuable to them, now what's important, what's hard, and how things work, that's also a kind of an MVP. So it doesn't essentially mean that it's a product in that term and that we would usually think about. Now, the main thing about the MVP and what will really challenge our thinking about these more traditional scale-oriented methods is that it's not an actual product. It's a learning vehicle. So it's not part of our project plan in a sense of building up a big piece of software necessarily. And it's definitely not something called what you'd be familiar with like a product development plan. So it may overlap with our software development activities, and this is truly, practically, emotionally the hardest part that we have to subordinate with the MVP. Now, the scaling or the output mission to the learning mission or the mission of learning about the outcomes, this is kind of the relationship that you have to build upon. That's why it's truly different about an MVP versus a traditional product cycle. Its main role is to learn what's going to be valuable to the user instead of just creating output that may or may not be valuable to them. Now, there are three major models that we'll talk about. Wizard of Oz is where we basically make a demo or kind of a fake experience that the user can check out, and then we watch what action they take. Do they sign up for an update or hand us $20, or we had to have some kind of evidence that they actually cared about it? So that's proportional and appropriate to the actual setting. Now, we shall look at some examples really quickly. The concierge MVP is where we hand create the user experience. So the HVAC in a hurry example that we have talked about of setting up a text message based service to help the technicians get parts or just writing along with them and acting as the human version of the software assistant that we think may be valuable to them. Also, a concierge MVP and then finally the sales MVP is a group that we can go and do where effectively try to sell the customer this thing before we have it without misleading them and seeing if they sign a provisional order or even sign up for an email update if you're actually advertising it online. So there are three main kind of models or patterns of MVP or experimentation vehicles that we'll talk about as we go through. So here's how it might fit in with HVAC in a hurry. Now, these are the same set of assumptions that we reviewed earlier that you might remember. The business of emailing, even though this is an internal initiative, this business of emailing the technicians and seeing if they care enough about this problem to sign up, to use the tool, or come to an online meeting about the difficulties they have around ordering parts. So we would put that under the sales model or pattern, and then both of those other ideas, they would be concierge vehicles. Now, here are a set of assumptions we talked about for Yaksha quiz. Now, they might map back to these vehicles particularly if you kind of look at them closely. Now, we would say that this thing of promoting a link through Google AdWords, Twitter, bringing these HR managers or whoever happens to click on them to a landing page and looking for a 10% sign up. Now, that's kind of a sales MVP when we're pre-selling and advertising, combined with the Wizard of Oz MVP because we're assuming that they're going to show some kind of a demo. Maybe a video or a set of screens, for example, or maybe just a brief description about what the product is all about. So this is kind of, you guessed it right, a composite MVP or a hybrid MVP. So this idea of hand creating quizzes for specific open positions for the HR managers, seeing if they use them, seeing if it helps, that would be concierge. Going out and just trying to sell to some people, which is a great way to do it if a sale is involved, that would be a sales MVP. Now, there's no evidence which is as definitive as people handing us money at the level that we would need. We mean that's always a great simple vehicle. Now, we've gone through some ideas about test vehicles that we can use and ways that those might apply to the assumptions that we teased out for two example companies. And we shall learn more about these in the sessions to come. So thanks a lot for watching this session, and I'll see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back. Now in this session, we're going to look at a few examples of systematic approach to innovation and how creative ideas about how to identify key assumptions and then test them in a creative way to figure out if you're driving a value. Now we're going to look at how this has worked out for a few consumer products. Then we'll have some business products. Now Dropbox started around 2007 and their idea was kind of file sharing that we probably know. Dropbox does now something that we market. Once there were products out there doing it, but then they just weren't very usable. Their proposition was if you build something that was very tightly tied to the underlying operating system and file systems of the major types of machines that people use, which is Macs, PCs, Android, iOS, then there would be widespread adoption of this technology and people would use it. So they went to the VCs because this was a big job and they needed money to do all this engineering and said, this is our idea, would you like to invest in it? And the VCs unfortunately said, look, there's a lot of competitors and these competitors aren't doing well, so it doesn't look attractive to us, so we're going to pass. So here on our screen is the Dropbox setup, and the terms you looked at, their early adopter was kind of applied digital innovation person. So they work on a lot of software or advertising production projects and share a lot of files, and they have this problem, and then we are using these assured alternatives, and here is our value proposition. The question is, given that they don't have a lot of money and time available, and they have ambitious idea about what they would want to be an awesome product, what could they do to prove or disapprove, validate or invalidate this idea, so that they could have the confidence to pull together the money somehow, or otherwise work through it? And how could they do that without building any software? Now, what they did was probably one of the most famous examples of the application of lean startup on these ideas. They used the Wizard of Oz model for MVPs, and they created an online demo that they posted on YouTube about what the Dropbox experience would be like. And then they took this video and embedded in a page with a sign-up action, and they drove traffic to it. Now, they initially drove traffic to it in an early market persona. This kind of techie person and these kind of little points that are really important to attract that kind of target audience. Now, they catered references to math and science fiction and things that would make the video perfectly consumable to the market at large. But that's their early market. So they could get some initial traction, would feel like they were spoken to, and they would get a beachhead there and get some sharing going. And it's just a good example of pairing some of these ideas we've talked about, where we want to know who our user is, what they care about, and what generally makes them tick. Now, with this idea, we're going to bring our proposition to life and find out a way to test it. So they got hundreds of signups, went back to the VCs to raise money, and definitely, the rest is history. Now, Zappos was started in 1999. Back then, the idea of people buying things online was not the inevitable conclusion that is today. The founder had the ideas just to take photos of shoes which he made an agreement to at the local shoe store, put them online in a very simple site, and just see if people bought them. He didn't build a fancy commerce infrastructure or building to fulfill this. Somebody ordered a shoe, he would just go down to the store, buy it, and ship it out to this person. Not scalable, not operationally reasonable, but that just wasn't the point. The point was not to scale a shoe selling operation before you knew whether such a thing was actually going to be a valuable proposition or hold any economic value. The point was to understand whether or not that something was valuable to do. So fundamentally, he thinks that if he offers this ability to buy shoes online, there's this certain person who knows what they want, but can't get it at local retail, and they wouldn't exactly know where they could procure it. Maybe now they're using mail order or they wait until they go to a big city, but if they could buy it online, that would be better for them. So the minimum feasible product for them was that they put these shoes online and just ship them. And then they scale up the business, and the rest, of course, is history. Though Sprig is a modern startup, so it's kind of a Whole Foods meets Uber. So we can have these fresh, healthy, they may be organic meals delivered to us wherever we go. So they felt that there was an opportunity to this space to go after this specific segment of buyer that would want this. So these were existing competitors. The fundraising process was slow, and scalable food preparation and delivery requires an infrastructure to do that. Now, who their market was in the terms here, but basically this is the material about who they were talking to and what they needed to do for them. Now, this is another kind of puzzle because we know a working infrastructure to cook and deliver food is quite a massive undertaking. So what would be an MVP that they could use? Well, it turns out that one of the most interesting things is they started this company on Sunday and did this on a Wednesday. They put together a temporary kitchen, organized to make meals. They didn't even really build a website. They just used Eventbrite to put the meal up there so that you could just buy as a ticket and actually have it delivered. So they mailed a group of friends and they observed who's buying it, where their people were originally sent to or people, and those people shared this, and what was this experience like for them. So did the buyer like it or not, and how did he react to it? So that's quite smart. So this worked very well for them, and it was something that they were able to do within the time parameters that were set for that particular design sprint. So now you might have been able to understand how you can tie in an MVP to a scalable and a value proposition model that's also economically viable. So we shall come across some more case studies in our next session. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hello everyone, welcome back to the session. Now in this session we will discuss case studies of business to consumer. We can see a few more instances how this methodology progressed with other consumer products. Let's say Paul Howe and Associates is a set of people. They were funded with startup ideas to process business to consumer. Generally in this fashion they were iterated through a couple of concepts. One of their ideas was that people like to know how much it costs for these things which are available in their house or apartment. They also needed to iterate this with a less amount of time and money. Now the formulation will display like this, which you've been utilizing. Then what will be the good MVP for them? To authenticate all these various things which the user may have a bank and credit card statement, for this they could have stopped to construct a big data infrastructure. Now from Craigslist, they obtain a few people to sign up and they actually conceal them. These people have to send their outputs of the statements or log into those systems. Manually, the founders generated statements to display these individuals people how much cost for all of these things. After this, they have a construct and experiment to check out. Now, if the user found the list valuable, like a subsequent sign up when they went through it, so it's actually their basic reaction whether they needed a copy or not. Generally, they found that no one really cared about this. The proposition of knowing how much it cost for their thing was not that much compelling. Now, instead of wasting a lot of time and money for building a software which was invaluable for the user, they proceeded to their next idea, which was a really good outcome process for them. Now, going ahead with another case study, which was a stealth photo social startup. This was advised through Stanford. This idea is for a treatment which have to process the photos that make them more compelling on social media. This is the formulation that might display by utilizing the framing which we had. For the minimal viable product for them, what will be good? Therefore, let's take a step through photo social journey. In this case, the individual user need to capture a picture and post them in social media like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and amongst other ones. Then what's really going to occur? Okay, we were checking out for this type of social acclimation. So basically, when they actually get attributed and acclimatized to social media. Now, the main key value assumption may be if the user processes this for their photos, then they might receive more of the social acclimation such as shares, uploads, retweets, etc. After this, they might get to admire this type of app and actually continue to use it. They will also refer to this for other people. Then what might be a good MVP? In this case, we have advised to execute this treatment on the photos. Here they wanted the software to automate for not processing this. Therefore, they grabbed photos and performed this process to them. After this, they posted and checked out if the photos were more compelling. This idea may not work properly because their social network felt that they were not compelling. Therefore, they moved on to another idea. Now they're working on this idea. The result for these experiments was not the similar output, which says we validated this proposition completely. But to value the iterative drive, we need to find the truth, if there is something valuable or not. Therefore, we will not move through the motions of constructing a couple of outputs, which are not valuable to the user. Then we may end up with the failure of the software idea, which actually nobody needs. It will be a massive weight of effort. Therefore, the basic moral of this case study says we need to place some kind of magic in the software. Sometimes there might be a notion which says if you construct this software, then the magic things may actually take place simultaneously. Now, the best way to think that this process may really reversed, we need to actually find out what that magic could be. Then we can automate and scale it within the software. Now, these concierge and other non-software MVPs are a very powerful way to process. Then find out 10 to 100 people who really admire this experience. Then discover how you can scale it or not. The process of evidence-based innovation really does work. This shows the particular way for these consumer products. And this always helps you to avoid waste and drive towards what is called a value or a valuable proposition. Thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope you guys understood the concept. I'll see you in the next video. Hello everybody and welcome back to the course. Now we will look at how this process of evidence-based innovation works for business-to-business products. Now Yaksha Quiz is a fictional company that we've been referencing as our startup example. By now we are accustomed with their basic proposition. Now they're looking at creating a lightweight quiz to help HR managers screen engineering candidates. This helps them figure out the extent to which candidates have the core skill set that the functional manager is looking for in that position. So what could be a really good MVP for them? We discussed briefly about it previously. There's a couple. One concierge MVP would be really good. They can create a set of even pencil and paper quizzes on a position-specific basis for HR managers. They can then determine if they actually use it and if we can actually do this for them. Will they ask us to use it for the next position? Did the functional manager get fewer unqualified candidates and fewer candidates overall, which led to them spending more time with the candidates they were interested in? Hence, the moral of the story is we don't need a lot of technology. Now, Google Forms or something of that sort might be a little more convenient for everybody. However, the point is that it's not necessary to start building a full-scale software application. Now, here's another kind of related question. Let's say that they did pass this first experiment with a result that says, yes, they actually like this. Now, the HR managers found this valuable. They asked to sign up. They're pretty happy to pay us whatever they think they need for the service, which could be $50 a month. Well, which topic should they use? It is not necessarily the topic that they use in the concierge MVP. Now, those may or may not represent the market at large. So, for example, should they make quizzes for Unix or Ruby or Java? What kind of programming languages, environments, tools will get the most uptake initially? Now, a good MVP for such a scenario might be a very classic sales MVP, where they run Google AdWords. Hence, they say hiring Ruby engineers versus hiring .NET engineers. Now, these are different programming languages, hiring DevOps, administrators, and so forth. So the entire category is there. Now they can basically pick their top 20, whatever it may be, topics, run these ads, and then compare the click-through rates on them. So which have the most uptake and which have the best overall conversion? So let's say a sign up, right? Now this is a pretty good MVP vehicle to test topics that will be the most pertinent for them. So I basically had started a company called Leonid Systems back in 2007. Now, one of the basic problems that we faced was telecom operators were transitioning from a kind of mainframe type system to a voice over IP or a VoIP, and real-time communication applications that ran on web servers. So this is basically the same way that most internet infrastructure runs now when it comes to VoIP or data handling. Now, in fact, this was very disruptive to their IT systems, the products they were selling, the kind of roles that they needed to administer these sort of systems. So I was very much interested in the IT part of this whole thing. Now, how will they redo their systems for customer care, billing, and web portals for users to maintain their service and things like that? So I did not raise any money for Leonid, right? I just bootstrapped it with my own cash. The vehicle I used for this purpose was consulting. So if you're in a business-to-business venture, be it internal or a startup, consulting is a great way to scale something up. So we started with consulting, and it was only me in the beginning. So we basically looked at problems faced by the customer. So why they wanted to hire us and what do they really expect from us? So when they looked at which was one of these, did we actually start seeing a lot of these in the market? So what are the types of engagements we do on a highly repeatable basis? And how do we build up some know-how, process, and intellectual property around that entire thing? Now, this made the consulting part of the business more scalable, more profitable, and easier to staff. Now, as we went through this, we were getting accustomed to specific problem scenarios that looked like they loaned themselves to propositions with software. So we built focal versions of these initial products early on, pretty much in tandem with customers, and they were sold as soon as they were published. Now, this was indeed a great way to scale the business up and at the same time ensure that we had a nice closed view of whether these things were valuable to the customer or not. If so, how? This generic type of approach of starting small and iterating up based on the value we find is a really great way to keep our startup healthy. Now, this concludes our review of these business-to-business examples. I hope you guys got some ideas that we can apply to your design sprints and the ones that we will execute in test motivation. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next session. Hello everyone, welcome to the session. Now in this session, we will discuss structuring experiments. Specifically, how could we structure them? We've already discussed if we process this, then we can find out what are the assumptions we have, and we have to check out the types of general vehicles for testing. We also need a detailed view of how to process this is highly actionable, so we can minimize the risk which occurs in experimental result. This will not show the conclusive. We can see the systematic view of how to process this over here. For the Yaksha quiz example, we will be using the concierge idea. For the HR managers to utilize if they've gone through and hand-created quizzes. Then specifically, how could they structure that experiment? First, we will make sure and convene what assumption this testing is processing, because we need to know about that testing process. Now, generally, we will be checking out if they will use this and convert to paying subscriptions. They will sort out the condensed version of this. How could we process this? And in the Google Forms, we will begin with custom-built quizzes, then check out if it's really valuable or not. Now let's see what are the metrics and threshold value. We might not be positive in these threshold values because it may not be the exact values, but it's very important to begin with them. So we might obtain as a habit of calibrating against metrics. It does not say we can change those threshold values, but it is important to begin with them. Therefore, we can see 3 metrics, which we have to process with a journey that these things have to process through. Then we can use them. We need to see those using 100% of the time. So the metric could be how many candidates did they interview. Generally, every single time they will use these quizzes, so we need to look at the entire 100% of the entire stash. So we need to look at 100% of the entire batch. Now, if they utilize those, then they might deliver half of these many candidates. So this is a very important part of the value proposition. Therefore, it will be the percentage of candidates screened. Before they move on to the next step in the interview process for the functional manager, they will be screened out. Now, we also check out some type of baseline, which you want to make sure it exists versus how will it work out only with the quiz in question. So then the third note says, how many people actually convert? How many people decide to buy it? Then we need to know if this is true or false. What are we going to carry out? Because if we didn't get the actionable result for the experiment, then it will just basically become like an amateur science project at the science fair, which is important as well, but it's not what we need in this business scenario. So it will not help us to drive what's really valuable and to make correct decisions as an agile team. Now, if this experiment results becomes true, then we will move forward and build a sample 1.0. Now, if we have 1 and 2 are true, then we will use it, but we will not buy. So then we have to step back and check out type of customer creation hypothesis or our value hypothesis. How valuable this could actually be? To whom will it be valuable? Are we checking out the right buyer? And who is responsible for paying for all this? Now, if this experiment result becomes false, then we will step back and unbundle the set of questions which we had about the problem area even further. We will then return back to the core of personas and problem scenarios. If not, we will be pivoting away from this entire idea. Now, in this example, we have some notes, right? In the lesson materials, we can check them out more in detail. In the venture design template, we can find a template. If we can go through and pencil out this by ourselves, that would be fantastic. Now, for instance, if you see the AdWords MVP, it will offer a quizzing solution in the area of X as opposed to Y. Then people will subscribe and run this Google AdWords campaign. They also need to see click-through rates about 2%, which is right or wrong. From there, they will start and then check out a comparative CDR, click-through rate between the various topics. So the .NET platform performs better than Java. Does Ruby perform better or worse than PHP? Now, if they receive an absolute CRT, then it's good enough. A couple of these can sort and pick their top 3. Then they will construct an MVP with an initial 1.0. So we can see some examples over here in more details about, then basically you can go ahead and find the templates. So we make sure that they will detail all this earlier. Then we will process this at the beginning of the actual motivation sprint. This can help us to make sure an experiment will run through and then drive to a successful final result. Go through this lesson a couple of times. It's very important for you to understand how to structure experiments the correct way and get to an actionable result using the MVP of your choice. Thanks for watching this session. I'll see you in the next one. Hi everybody, welcome back to the course. Now, how do we get ready to run this motivation sprint? Let's call attention to a couple of things. We have slides to help introduce the team and warm them up with a few exercises. Key concepts that we want to ensure we are comfortable articulating are this critical difference and relationship between motivation and usability, and the fact that motivation is separate and that we are testing it in this particular sprint. Now, we will also talk a bit about instances at this point, where teams tend to focus on this, the usability testing. Now, what we will do at our next sprint, the reason why we have put this motivation sprint before that in the process is frequently, we have to over-focus on the usability testing. Since it is more clinical, easier to do, tests are a little less socially awkward, as we are not trying to engineer their fundamental desire and put them in a position to say no. They don't like our product, which is daunting to them as well as us. However, it's pretty important because as a consequence of that tendency, we see lots of beautifully executed products that nobody wants to use. Now, this is not what we want to build, which isn't valuable to our user. So these are related, but we're here to focus on motivation. We should first make sure that we can articulate and tie to specific examples. This idea of evidence-based innovation and the practice of lean startup. We should also make sure that we are comfortable with our design thinking material, personas, as well as problem scenarios. Now, in case you're introducing these to the team for the first time, just make sure that these concepts are clear, as you will definitely build on this foundation. Understanding as you figure out your ideas and hypotheses. Now, which of these vehicles should we use? How do we prepare? As far as preparation is concerned, make a list of your key assumptions and how these vehicles might be deployed to test them in advance of the designer's frame. Now, in case the team thinks they want to do, let's say, Google AdWords, then set that up and ensure that it's working for the entire team. Now, if you foresee customers or internal people inside our company lined up to do concierge tests, make sure you spend some time to set it up in advance. This ensures you don't have any downtime during the design sprint. Now, let's see the flip side of it. We are not in a position to over-advocate these vehicles. We just want to unlock the creativity of our team in thinking about these things. We can start by running the activities, and as we are getting to our final conversion and formulating a game plan, we can throw in ideas about this, which will be hard, and this will be easy. Now, here's how we could go about this. Here's how we could go about that, and here's how we could do that. And here are a couple of reasons for that. So it's basically this is successive, iterative way of kind of figuring out how it's moving. One, we want to get everybody's ideas. Two, if we tell them that we already have the answer, it puts a dampener on their participation in general. They will begin to feel that this isn't a meaningful exercise. They will just go through the motions and you already sort of know what you want to do. The other thing in general about preparation is that since we do not know exactly what experiments will run in advance probably, or at least one that we wouldn't recommend, you need to be prepared to be a very dynamic taskmaster. Now, there should be some system to keep track of what everybody's doing. Whatever you're currently using may be best, but a system like Trello is really good. Make sure that you have that ready as you may be required to do a lot of tracking on who's doing what in order to get those experiments up and running. So let's come back to this question of which one of these vehicles should you use. Now, we highly recommend your deep consideration of the concierge vehicle. There's a few reasons for that. One, it prevents zeroing in on a particular proposition too early. Two, it will give you a lot of perspective and learning. This is particularly helpful if you're early on in the process. Now, we use it not only validate or invalidate a proposition, we may notice lots of important ancillary details that may give us other ideas about what makes a great proposition. It also gives ideas for all the little details that make up a good product. Things that will end up as child stories and test cases and accumulate into the little details that makes things valuable to the user. Finally, please do not do surveys. It's a terrible way to get real good evidence. However, let's admit that many of us will probably do surveys because that's something that we're used to. In case you do a survey, at least set it up. There's a choice between alternatives. Kind of make it a little more intelligent in a way. So for instance, out of these 10 things, please pick one or rank order them or something like that. We're basically creating a choice for our users to figure out what's valuable to them. What definitely does not work is a yellow Walkman kind of question about, what would you like? Yes or no? Now they may just say yes, even at arm's length, even over a survey. If they say yes or a no, we may not have a lot of context around that. Now that's generally why experts are recommended. We would specifically question about the use of surveys. Now, these are some ideas about the kind of vehicles we might want to use and why we are using them. Now, in terms of sprint lead, how to prepare for them in advance so that you don't really end up with downtime at the time of actually running your motivation sprint. So that's all for this particular session. Thanks for watching. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. Now we have discussed different vehicles to test our assumptions. We have also introduced the idea of an MVP. Now let's quickly go through how this works across consumer products, business to business products and IT projects. All of these are applicable for the consumer product. The sales MVP is very popular. For example, we can place things like Kickstarter in this category. If you can recollect from Dropbox, sales is often used along with Wizard of Oz. Now, one problem that plagues most established companies in this area is that they feel uncomfortable putting unfinished items in front of the customer. This is a reasonable question to consider. If we do this in limited circulation, they may not care about it as much as we think. Now, an alternative way to get this done is to do these off-brand. In case we are doing a motivation sprint as a sprint lead, it is imperative that we set it up well in advance with whoever might handle that. If this comes across as a novel idea, be rest assured that it really isn't. Now, for consumer packaged goods companies, this is pretty nominal. They do it on a regular basis. However, when it comes to software, it's not that prevalent. Now, if you want to go ahead and do this, it is a good item to consider. However, keep in mind that we are running into that particular problem of going on brand. We will now discuss how a lot of these sales concierge experiments might work online because that's one of the most popular vehicles in this area. We have this funnel. As we bring in a bunch of people here, this shall narrow as we go forward. We first need to find a way to get their attention. Now, these are some of the typical options to achieve that. It is not necessary that we choose just one of them. Now, we can try a whole bunch of them. In case it is a team exercise, this is a pretty good way to divvy people's work up, while at the same time letting them experiment with different things. After a click-through, they go to a landing page. Now, these are focal pages that are not interested in talking about our entire company or product. They're completely invested on one narrative and bringing the customer through one journey. There is usually some sort of call to action such as sign up, to hear more, and stuff like that. Now, this is an example from Unbounce, which is a popular site with sets of pre-made landing pages and landing page infrastructure like multivariate testing, A/B testing, email signups, things like that. This is from their gallery and these people sell homes. We can gather that pretty easily. Then they do a little explaining and forming a sort of call to action. Get evaluation estimate. We put in our name. We didn't ask them to fill all the details. We reduced that action barrier a lot. If you were not aware about this, this is what it looks like. Services such as Unbounce are a great way to make this easy on our team. For instance, if they're not familiar with building web pages, they can just use this tool, which is quite accessible. Now let's see how this works for business products. My top recommendations here are Concierge MVP. The reason behind this is being that it's so useful is that typically, if you were to sell it to a segment like HR managers, we know how to find these people and access them. If we can't, there might be probably another problem that we should face anyway. Now we get a better understanding of the customer experience, customer journey, ancillary issues once we move through all of this using the concierge vehicle. So one of the things we will do in the design sprint is think about each major assumption and then de-alienate it. Just imagine how each of these vehicles might look as a way of testing an individual assumption. It's a pretty good way to push yourself to think about a bunch of them. However, I would highly recommend the concierge MPV if your product is a business project. Now when it comes to IT projects, depending on their area or the kind of stats you believe, a lot of them indicate over half of them failing. While it is important to think about our users as a customer, the notion that it's an internal software and they have to use it is just an illusion of control that doesn't really exist. It is not necessary that they actually use it. They don't have to use it properly. If they don't like it, it might become a real problem and the project won't succeed. So we may try another software. So this cycle of IT that people don't like, and it really becomes a really expensive proposition. Now it is therefore advisable to view them as customers. Does this concierge be able to just sit down with them and watch them actually do their jobs? Help them with their jobs and actually see how it works out. Now just take the rough version of the software, brief them about it as a sales process, see if they sign up for different topics. It's normal when it comes to the implementation of a big expensive system that we do this part of first, and then part of it, and a part of another one, and then so on. Now many a time we have an agenda setting moment in these projects where we could use something like the sales MVP to take the temperature and make a good decision on that. Hence there are some ideas about vehicles that might be a good fit for us depending on the kind of project we are looking at. These are just a few things to consider as a sprint lead as we get ready to run this motivation sprint. So thanks a lot for watching this session. I will see you in the next one. Hello and welcome back to the course on Motivation Sprint. Here we discuss the propositions and we figure out before we build a bunch of software that we don't know whether they need the propositions. Therefore, the inputs are the usual sprint checklist, which reviews the concepts that we had seen in the last module. Now, thinking a bit about how some of the assumptions might come out in the area, this is how some of the experimentation vehicles, the MVP vehicles that we have discussed, then sales and concierges works. The possible going of groundwork, in case they are the ones the team needs to use to prepare for that. The outputs are a ranked set of assumptions. Hence, the assumptions around the propositions are the most important experimental designs, and the game plan is to execute the experiments. Now, in the AM, we use some of the techniques. Also, we discussed at the storyboarding to check out all the assumptions. Then we make sure there aren't parts of the customer journey that they're glossing over. It's the best experiment idea to move to the PM. Basically, in the PM, we have got the assumptions, so we draft and converge the set of experiments and then plan to execute them. Now, there are slides to help us walk through the lesson material and exercises. Now, there are a couple of concepts that will make sure to get an understanding of the team with the idea of the relationship, for the conceptual separation between motivation and usability. Now, to make sure that we talk about the yellow Walkman problem, and we are doing fundamentally different than the customer interviews that we might have done previously to work through the personal and the problem hypothesis. Now, let's look at the day. Following the warm-up, also we recommend going through, and the slides will support the idea, but drafting with pencil and paper with the AIDAOR storyboards. Therefore, we think through the customer journey and compare notes on what we think, and then there's time allocated to go around the room with all the participants. Now, the amount of time that takes to go through the storyboards, and AIDAOR storyboard has typically 6 panels. It would plan on anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes if you're getting people talking, and it could be more. Now, it is for the team of about 6 people, and if you need to calibrate the item, because we would be encouraged to have everybody in the storyboards. They have the idea about the assumptions that are structured, and they're structured that way. So we spend some time to pair everybody up. At this point, we start working with peers in pairs. Also, we draft the assumptions. Then some time allocated to go around the room. It is built for the work separately, and then we compare together. Suppose, if we found in the last sprint that achieves active pairing, so they work on one set of materials at a time. We found that works well and better. Thereafter, we need to divide the different assumptions, and each of the assumptions has pairs about each of the MVP approaches, and we have the slides. Now, we ask them for each assumption to go through the sales, the concierge, and the Wizard of Oz to work for the particular assumption. That is the way of diverging a wide set of ideas about how we might get individual assumptions. Now, we'll divvy out on how many we need, put the guideline as 1 by 3 plus 1, the number of items there. So there are 15 experimentation ideas. There will be 6 sticker dots for each person that they allocate to the ideas. Here we have the set of high-level experimentation ideas, and we take a break because we voted on them, and we're going to go through it and discuss them. Now here we have an assumption: the concierge version, the Wizard of Oz version, and the sales version. Then people vote with sticker dots on which they think are the most compelling. We look at the ones that have the most votes and then use them as the focal point for the subsequent discussion. Therefore, based on the ones which are the most popular, we'll divvy out the experiment ideas to the same pairs, and they'll draft experiments using the template which we saw previously. They will grind through the details of exactly how we execute it and the metrics that are the prep steps to actually get it done. Also, we make sure to emphasize that point, since we want them to think about at the point the experiment should be executed, because we only have a couple of hours for making a plan to do that. Hence, we make sure that we think about the cost, the time to do the actual activity. So there's a pretty substantial period to present around the room, because at the point, as we mentioned about, we could or we couldn't do that too early. Now, it is probably the point where we should introduce the own opinions towards the end of the discussion to filter down as one hand. It'll be a good vehicle to test the assumptions, and on the other hand, it'll be tenable and doable in a design sprint period that we have allocated. Now, in this way, we spend the last 2 periods and break down the top experiment designs into individual tasks and divvy that they're out if we have like a tool like Trello. Now, thereafter, the Facile tool is where we can look at things and the tasks at who's doing, and that's a kind of a really great place to record and maintain archives. But we were generally trying to find some place where we can divvy out the task, assign them to people, and monitor the status. Hence, one fine day, we have design sprint getting rolled, and there we find it's a really good way to drive to the value for the user. So thanks a lot for listening to all my sessions. If you have any questions, you can send them in, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back to the session. Here we're going to see in the context of a sandwich for the particular design sprint. We go into it with a set of assumptions and experiments, therefore we get the set of results. Now there's a lot of variation depending on the experimental vehicles that we decide with the team and the best fit on day one. Now we have a couple of things around our emphasis. In this way, the preparation is important. If you think that certain vehicles are to be executed a certain way, then try the things out and lay some of the groundwork. It almost certainly won't hurt us. Therefore, we find it handy for some experiment there down the road somewhere, or some activity related to getting the software tested. And the second thing is there are examples, most of them could be executed within 48 hours. Therefore, there's a lot of the greatest examples. There are things that are scrappy, creative, and could be executed relatively quickly. So we think about the preparation as we consider it often. Sometimes we allocate to set it up in the morning, but generally it's a good idea for us to act as an individual contributor during the sprints and be down there with everybody doing the things. Now, many different tasks are running with different people, which might be a good idea to take out of the role. Then we manage tasks, avoid obstacles, remove them for the team, and the things keep running. Hence, finding that we need to, that doesn't mean that we are actually failing, but it's kind of normal. It is a design sprint that potentially has a lot of moving parts. We might have meetings at least once a day on it to see what everybody does and how everybody's doing as well. So the progress and the obstacles that are impeding the progress, to remove them, we can continue to progress because the sprint lead is always the key task for us. Now we keep the experiments moving. If there's an obstacle we go under, it can be creative and it could be scrappy, but we keep pushing forward. So that's the true meaning of actually running the design sprint. Thanks a lot for listening to this session, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi everybody and welcome back to the course. Here we are looking at day 5. Therefore, we take the results which we've got to figure out the truth. The truth is whether we have the proposition that is adequately motivating to the user. Whether we're going to create something that they're not going to use and armed with the truth, then we will move through the propositions and decide where we are with them. Therefore, we figure out the key learnings. As always, we drive to the set of user stories and wireframes. Also, even if we need to move on and do some other testing, what the result would mean for us to go out and write software. Hence, we work on the propositions and the epics, and then we will detail out the child stories and look at patterns and wireframes for drafting prototypes. Now we have everybody pair up and we review each other's results. Let's look at the problem scenario sprint where we created the personas, which is sort of the equivalent type of activity to review everybody's transcripts. So what do you want to make sure of here? Therefore, we make sure that the notes we took about the experimental results and the packaging of data that we collected are organized, such that someone else other than the person who ran it would possibly run the version of the person that ran in 30, 90 days, and when they actually forget about the specifics. Then they look at the stuff and understand it, and it's actionable. We spend a lot of time creating the results. We need to make sure that they're usable for us after the fact. Now, it is essential about it here, and then we pair everybody up, prepare them, and do whatever we think makes sense. Then divvy out the proportions that we have tested with the revisions to them we thought would make sense and draft epics. And we do that at the end presentation, such that the pair will converge the epics and show them to the rest of the group which is around the room. Therefore, the draft storyboards in the same pairs will compare, update, and the pairs show one version of the storyboard as we suggest. Although if we find it better, we consider the whole process for 25 minutes, and everybody tries to show the individual storyboards. It isn't actually a tie like we wear. This is like a spillover time, and we will take the epics that we have thought, discussed, and possibly revised. Hence, we will draft child stories and test cases against them. We will do this sort of peer convergence loop here and then do it all around the room here. Then at this point, we should have well thought about stories and are anchored back to the propositions. So it goes through as pairs and fights patterns and comparable that we think are a good fit for executing the chunk of functionality that might look like and discuss them. Therefore, we recommend it around the room, and then they can take a long time because other people have ideas and we don't want to rush through that. We need to explore them, which could be valuable. Although by using the UI design, we don't need to reinvent the wheel in meaningless ways, but we need to look at the job that we try and do. The thing that we are going to present to the user, what are the metaphors that we already likely to understand and perform the given task? Then we're going to close with drafting wireframes and make a discussion around the room that concludes with a decision about what to actually do next. Then, as we mentioned before in the problem scenario sprint, if you're particularly obliged to go ahead and start writing software, we can sort of curtail at some part of the discussion. But if you're not, we may need to steal some time and abbreviate the wireframe drafting and make sure we have enough time to decide what we think the team should do next. Now, it is the motivation sprint, a great way to make sure we create some value for the customer and to get a habit of doing the testing and cultivate the experimentation mindset. Therefore, instead of arguing on which is going to happen. Now, the world likes it instead have the culture where we're able to structure things that are assumptions and figure out how important they are and how they should be tested instead of fussed about inside the conference room. It's the goal with the motivation sprint and to iterate the way to do something that's valuable for our user. So thanks a lot for listening to the session. I'll see you in the next one. Now, welcome to this session. Now, in the usability sprint, we're going to see how we make time to do usability testing so that we don't want to be in the cycle from where we won't be able to test the software till it's over. After this, we need to release it, so we cannot do a testing after that. Now, to avoid this stage, we will use both prototypes and working software depending on the situation and to run a very particular set of experiments. We will learn to execute, which is organized around testing usability. Now, these hypotheses will lend themselves to customer discovery interviews here when we discuss with actual people. Now, with the hypotheses loan themselves to evidentiary experiments, we can put choices or sell things to someone and see what they do. Now, this module is about the usability hypothesis and the use of some very specific techniques, which is very particular. It is correct to figure out the answers like if your software is usable and if it's valuable to your end user. Now, everything will revolve around these user stories, which is presumed to be already known. We will use comparable and prototypes. Then, we can learn about these usability test plans, which we will run. Now, in case of confusion about the types where this fits, we must know our customer. We have found a valuable solution for them, which are formulated here. Teased out into a set of hypotheses and assumptions, validated with motivation experiments. We are driving into the specifics of how to carry things, where we believe the user is motivated to do, and lower the action barrier. Lower the difficulty of them while using it. So we are trying to take advantage on the exacts this year of our fog course, which is ended in this area, where the user is taking action and they're adequately compelled to use our software. Now, there's a lot of misperceptions about usability. In a lot of things, people think it's about flashiness and have various elements doing what all are doing. And it might be a good idea in some cases. Now, it is soluble like other items and also is soluble to people who are not trained as designers. This specialty expertise is available to you. What we do here, in fact. Now, this doesn't require very special prior training in design or usability. All it requires is diligence and experimentation and practice. So the design process in this context is about these three things here: focus, consistency, and the willingness to experiment and iterate until you get something highly usable. Now, let's discuss about the misperceptions or sort of shorthand that people use when the reference of good design is given. Now, Apple has great products because they've always kept it simple. It's true, but it's not a very actionable statement. Now, for simplicity, we need to focus. if there were 10 things which could be on a page, we know the customer and we have the experimentation infrastructure in place where we can just take 3 things which we know and are needed. Then we figure out the other 7 things which are needed to be there down the road as part of the roadmap. So we know the 3 things and know the 7 things could come in later. We will instrument observation into figuring that out. This requires understanding, and we get it from what we were doing here in the design sprints. Knowing your customer is essential and the propositions that are compelling to them. Without this, simplicity is impossible to achieve in the sense of making the right set of choices for the user. Now let's discuss about consistency element. It really doesn't matter. If the page is red or blue, people will spend hours arguing about this. It's about making a certain type of thing red. It should always be red because it's that consistency that users will mostly subconsciously have a positive reaction to. Like if you have a magnifying glass that we're using in the product, it really doesn't mean zoom and search. Now, it can only mean one of these things. This is the consistency in this context. So keep it simple and consistent and avoid overdoing it. So how does this experimentation thing work in the context of usability? That's one of the biggest questions we want to answer. The fundamental principles are the same as the lean startup, the scientific method approach, the evidence-based innovation where we learn about that material in the session on motivation sprints. Here our objectives are more tactical. So we start from the kind of user and what makes them tick, and we have our hypothesis in these user stories. So in the third clause, as a user wants to do something, let's say to achieve X, this is our tactical hypothesis, and we're going to be testing it while we test the usability. You will learn the self-assess of this is with your something that would be done as part of your usability testing. So the methods will be useful and economical with respect to the time. It's going to be different depending on whether you're in the early phases of a product or feature or you have something already iterated and refined. So we learned about the design phase appropriate experiments and how to run those. Now, for example, Brand Lattice is a product and it uses drag and drop. So then we discussed that drag and drop on the web was a relatively new thing. You can put somewhere and make it perfectly functional. Users will not get the affordance exists. They can pick something and drag it on a normal web page. So we noted that assumption early on in our venture design doc, and we made sure it was very focal when we tested. This is the product. So there are these squares here, and the idea is to drag them into these gray boxes as you progress through this interaction. And there's a tool tip here, which cannot be read. Click on the picture to see the options again. Now, this was kind of a train wreck, right? 70% of the users didn't get this at all. So they actually got stuck. Now, whatever time was given, they couldn't move past this. It was not a great result because we had this experimentation mindset and we wanted to test something very light without any extra explanation. And then layer in more explanation and we would observe how well the users were able to understand of the discoverable on this particular interface. So we can iterate. After 2 days, we had another test and in the slightly smaller version. Now, we changed the disposition of the text a little bit. An arrow here between this area and the area, it was enough. 90% of the users got through it and it was fine at that point, exactly the way we wanted it. So this was an example of this iterative mindset. Now ensure that instead of arguing about the user's understanding, put those assumptions on the board and make them a focal point for your testing, which we will learn while we learn through the rest of this session and this course. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for joining in on to this session. Now, as you start with this systematic approach for assessing usability, it's important to have a framework which will allow decomposing with our user interaction. For this, I will use Donald Norman's 7-step model. Let's discuss about some of the basic vocabulary. For example, an old tub and there's this dial here. Now, it will allow the drain to open and close so that you can either drain or fill the tub. This dial goes up and down, and so the dial is a signifier, representing flip up and down. It looks like a dial. People have a model of dial and it's working. Now it's an important distinction. The dial goes up and down and it's called as affordance. Now these things are tightly linked, but the signifier is the way we interact, what an object can do, and the affordance is what it does. This is a refinement made by Donald Norman to this material because people didn't have the vocabulary readily available to discuss about. Now this is the fact that something done versus the fact that user understands it in a drag and drop inference. Now, this was seen in the Brand Lattice user interface. You're going to be hearing this example a lot. The signifier was the thing that those squares in that space. There was an arrow which moved over there. Now, the idea looks like a drag and drop opportunity. Those would all be signifiers. And then finally, you can pick those panels up and pictures and move them over to the right. This was the affordance of drag and drop. A constraint will help the user not to take unnecessary waste. This dial will go up and down, neither side to side, nor in a circle, and this is a constraint. It helps the user understand and discover that this can be put up and down like a drain opens the tub. The draining or filling of the tub is called a feedback. So while it is closed, we observe that the water accumulates, and when it's open, the water drains. Lastly, mapping is a type of general model where people are having this dial which is controlling this drain. Now, this dial is controlling some type of a valve and an open-closed state in these pipes. Now, while moving forward in the course here, go through these 7 steps in detail and this vocabulary which relates to those, and we will take a bunch of examples to make you understand better. So thanks a lot for watching this course, and let's go on pushing ahead. Welcome to this session. We will go through these 7 steps of user cognition, then we will have a solid background for details and the interactions between user and product. So values can be driven and we can achieve usability for them without any arguments and waste. The 7 steps starts with a goal. For example, a person sitting in the dark and reading a book and he wants to continue reading, so his goal is to continue reading. He's trying to find an alternative, like reading somewhere which has more light, or he can bring the light next to the chair. But raising an arm and turning on a lamp is a type of action. Assume the lamp is working like this metaphor, and then he perceives that the light has flipped on, as there is a bright illumination. He interprets this result as the light is on and he has enough light to read, or does he need to see any other alternatives? Here the model resembles with a set of questions. Side steps are fed forward, so the user is making decisions and expressing their volition. On the other side, where they get feedback, they see what the object does and figure out their process. They get what they want is the reward. Now go back to the items, the vocabulary that we discussed earlier. Signifiers help to initiate the right action, and they show user the steps that should be taken with our software especially. When user interfaces metaphors is understood. Now this informs the user here in the form, and you can type the word or in any drop down. Click it and you'll see a lot of options. Now those signifiers underneath them have a set of affordances, certain abilities to do things. Now when things are getting done, the constraints help avoid error. Feedback of the course is critical. They should be perceived clearly and definitely. So you've entered this data and set the record to save. Now, if there's a particular problem, then that should be fixed in that way itself. It's a matter of both perception, so that they see what's going on, and then interpretation to understand that a certain thing has happened during a certain place. Now, using clear mappings and modules, we'll make the interpretation more implicit. They basically require less thought on the part of the user as we want. We don't want user to work hard to achieve what they want to achieve with our software. This is primarily our job as a product implementer. So it's finished by comparing the result and figuring out if they have, which they wanted, or did they achieve the reward they were looking for when they initially perceived it as a goal. So do, are, or are they trying to figure out something else? So these different layers describe the happening with the user, right? The lowest layer is a visceral layer, and they're having a positive or a negative reaction on that. So if a site has lots of different colors and strange typefaces, even if it's a high functioning site with really good content, they will have a visceral reaction to that. And if this would make them kind of think that the site doesn't look that great and it looks kind of crappy. So for this image, you might have an extremely negative reaction, like something bad is going on here. There's a decomposition and germs and maybe something really dangerous. So this is bad. We should actually move away. So this image makes us feel very nice. Let's say like puppies comes up and they're friendly, cute, and harmless. So that's what's called a visceral layer. So the behavioral layer is a thing we must know how to do innately through learned behaviors. For example, like a raised arm. It happens automatically. We want to achieve the same with the software, while using metaphors that are appropriate to the task at hand. We allow the user to use easier and readily available software. Then finally is the reflective layer, is where we get what I want, which alternatives which we'll use to execute. For example, in the problem scenarios, the plan step is where we decide. I have this problem scenario and I had this trigger that gives me this goal. I want some kind of reward completion here, and which alternative can be used. Let's use the software that you built or use some other alternative which works better. So thanks a lot for watching this session, and I'll see you in the next one. Now, welcome to this session. We have seen through different usabilities in a systematic way using normal 7 steps. Now, one of the agenda was to use well understood cognitive models of how a user will approach your interface. Now, we're discussing about comparable and prototyping. So just learn the way to identify comparable and translate them forward into prototypes, which can be used for better discussions with your team. Testing your ideas before implementing them at a very high cost in the software. Now, before we start, let's discuss about the importance of prototype. The cost of your software is to get many users, though it's very expensive to change. Now, the early phase of a project with your strengths, you must know this phase and prototype it a lot. It is an investment in building more valuable software at a very low cost. You can start with sketching stuff or making things in balsamic. It's fine. Now let's find the pattern which a user expected to see here to do this job. Execute on this familiar narrative, the functional things which they have used. Might encounter here and find appropriate signifiers from the Donald Norman material for the actions at hand. Go and find patterns. So this is a set of pattern libraries which you can check. Do some research, 2 to 3 sets of distinct different patterns. 2 or 3 will help to unlock the potential of your team to arrive at the right interface. Now let's go back to the story of Ted, a HVAC technician and HVAC in a hurry. So we wanted to identify a part to figure out the next steps and replace. So we needed to know the availability and the price for that part. Now for this interaction, we didn't have anything built yet. So what are some ideas about a comparable site where you can find that? It should not have anything to do with HVACs necessarily. So which are some comparable type sites or applications that the HVAC in a hurry team might go and look at to think through patterns that might be appropriate for this test? Now let's look at some ideas. One could be online shopping. So this is the pattern where we go and buy something and we may have a very significant idea about what we want and particular terms to describe it. Or we can have generalized terms like when the HVAC technician did not know. Which part we want to filter down, a few different options to something that we really needed, and we should be good. Now the user card purchase. Okay, so this is a type of thing. I need a specific car in a specific price and should be nearby. But this has a little more structure. So this might be counterpoint in the broader patterns, which we see in e-commerce. Next is photo search. So this is another type where we find a very visual search test with our users. That in sites where people see photos for enjoyment, it might be a good thing. General record search applications, for example, in Gmail, where we look for a particular email or a CRM system in which we are looking for a particular customer, case, or something. Now, these things are worthwhile too to check out. Point here is to go broad and cover a lot of areas, not necessarily topic related. For example, some stuff the team may pull in this online shopping comparable, as seen they're hypothetically looked at in various sites, the way they approach the same thing. So here are all the results of search for iPhone chargers. So it's kind of interesting to note the way these different sites and these pattern libraries actually approach that. There are various sites which sell these things, which we check, and then a pattern page like the site, which is like a UI pattern, right? So here we look at a couple of distinct things which stand out. So their product page pattern and a table filter pattern, we can identify that there's elements of these sites which are interesting. So here's the bigger view. The way that it looked in Amazon with this particular search. Now the right answer is not just to look at a particular site, a large site, and say, just because they're doing it, we must do it too. Instead, the right way is to approach this in a generalized way. Now, a site like Amazon or Walmart.com, or let's say Jud.com, just J-U-D, for them this works well, and they've learned that it works well for their user experience, infrastructure, big picture vision, which is not so in this particular case. So it's important to check these very anatomically. Now, for example, the way they deal with the job of showing multiple views of the same thing, or the way they sort results and allows modifying your search. So there are commonalities across similar type of sites and those things the user expects to see. Now let's take example of another site. In this, we have automobiles for sale. We can check the way to search the car and the way that they would work and the similar type of searching and filtering. And we look at a set of results the way that is approached by this different type of sites that sell cars. Now, team may find that they have more structure, which are applicable. Prototype draws very, very broadly on e-commerce metaphors and use car search metaphors as seen here. Now, this is a simple search here for search by part number for this part of our child story, which has more structured search for. Now, when we have idea what we want, then we have this kind of metaphor. A unique thing with the HVAC technician, where they just upload a photo and this is one concept. Like this, you should try many concepts. Look at 2 sets of comps and consequently draft at least 2 different concepts from those concepts. Now, 2 or 3 or 4 sets of concepts to look at. This way, a product search looks after, we initiate the search. This is like the results may appear now, and these are search parameters. So we will check for an Acme A correlator, and it's a part type sniggler, and we can modify the search and look for the results. Now, team may find the metaphor of sorting by most popular is actually a really relevant thing for us because an HVAC technician would want to order, what everybody else is ordering. So we will sort initially by popularity on how frequent things are ordered. Now, this way, the product detail page might look like for this kind of last step where they can place the order and see the arrival time. Here's the different set of patterns for a photo search. So we can search for a car, but on a photo site, let's say like Flickr or Instagram or Google Images, there are several different prototypes, which is inspired by this sort of photo search metaphor. So here, we have a more general search. We can still modify the search parameters. We're starting by popularity, but some results are much more visual. We go there to see the details about them, so this is basically your second concept. Now, our next step will be to test this with actual users. Here, there are different detail page for that second concept. Brand Lattice is another example. It's actually a product. So this is for a mood and basically like a broad mood for designers, right? So graphic designers, and to have a quick brand strategy exercise with your customers. This way, application looks like when we started, we needed a list and a kind of a sequential process, because the mood boarding process is where you pick some images and then you get a filter set of words that you can pick from for all these things, and they are related to each other. So we checked at this kind of wizard platter where we go through step 1, 2, and 3. So we checked at various travel booking sites in which you book a flight, a hotel, and so on. Sites where you could buy insurance. Then you put all this information in sequentially. Now, here we came with this early version of the site, and we assumed the way that it might look like. So we also refined these by testing them with users and seeing the results. And we finally arrived at the thing that we now see on screen, which is beautiful. So these are some ideas on prototypes and the way that we can build something meaningfully with a lot of structure and keeping a lot of EQs and IQs in range. So prototypes are tested in these ideas with the users, right? With user stories. Here you're creating many possibilities, which may result in really high usability. The biggest trick here is not to fall into the trap of predicting the user's behavior, because it cannot be done with any kind of reliability. Check the well-understood patterns which user can understand. Find the way to render those into prototypes and then test those with your user. This is the way to get the cheapest and best usability outcomes. So that's all for this really important lesson on usability. Go through it once more. If you have any questions, let us know. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome back to this particular session. Here we will discuss about setting up Balsamiq. As mentioned earlier, it's good to have some prototyping tools on hand. There are a lot of great options, and we tend to use Balsamiq markups because it's connected to Google Drive. As we can see, they have an amazing sketchy quality. There's a good way to articulate out the user storage. Now, you might have heard this saying, a prototype is worth 1,000 meanings. In fact, we can have very productive explanatory and assessment tests using the interactive markups as we get into user testing. Now let us recreate the part of markups that we saw in course 1 for the parts ordering. Let us drag elements that they offer from the top into the editing area, and we can change their name. We shall call it as identify and order. Now we will zoom in a bit so that it's easier to see. We can search for different elements that we want to overlay. The search is really great, so let's search for dropdown. The alternative name for that is combo box. Now let's edit this to make. On the right hand side here, we can see these additional properties that we can edit, including link. We will link to an external address, or if there is another markup in here, we can link to that. And that's how we create interactive markups. We will now duplicate this one and edit this to TADA. Now while editing, you can observe the transition between the two screens. Now let's go back to our original one, click here, link the screen here to this next one. So we click on this link and then click on new markup copy. Now if you go to full screen mode, which is this little button here, then if you go and click on make, then we go to TADA, which is TADA. Now we can run the markup this way, or we can render them into a PDF, and the links will be available on screen as clickable links. We can also export all these assets as PNG files, which is your visual representation as images. We can also use another tool like Keynote, or there are some good tools for mobile markups online as well. So this is definitely a handy tool to begin the habit of sketching out our own ideas and to provide some opportunity to ourselves to do a very early rough user testing before investing time and money in creating the actual working software. So I hope you guys all enjoyed understanding what this software can do and creating these markups. So thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching all our sessions so far, and welcome to the next one. Now in this session, we will discuss about fun and affordable user testing. Now we've discussed about how to think through usability and make good decisions, but ultimately access is a lot about experimentation. So here we're going to introduce some ideas about testing usability. Now the key thing here is not to confuse our motivation testing with the usability testing. We will result in confused answers and bad effects if we try to confuse them, as they're fundamentally different. Now for example, if you have a software that paints virtual walls and we want to test its usability, then we wouldn't ask the user, now do you want to paint this wall? What about color? And why would you like to paint this wall, right? So we would instruct saying, could you paint this wall yellow? And see if they're able to do it or not. The focus and clarity of purpose is one of the most important attributes of successful user interface usability testing. Now, in addition to that, there's a cycle of non-testing, which occurs frequently and is terrible. Hence, we don't test the software, because once it's done, then it's ready for release. However, we can use prototypes and get quick tests done early on, very easily, that are meaningful, without a lot of work and using the test plan, which we'll go through in this module. It's also important to de-alienate what we're testing, where we are at, and why we're testing in a certain way. So an explanatory test is for when we're trying to figure out what approach is going to make sense. We have looked at some patterns and comparables. We have wireframed a few things, but we could go a couple of different ways in trying to decide which is the best way. Now, we probably might not articulate out the whole functional space yet, but might just want to test some atomic interface elements and see if they make any sense to the user for this purpose or not. Now, once we settle on an approach that we like, we move on to assessment testing. Now, at this stage, we expand the functional space. However, it might be a little difficult and tedious, and we are not really timing the user. The objectives are not defined, and can the user click this drop-down box instead? Now, this is important as all our research objectives and the templates are anchored in the user stories themselves. Now, at both of these phases, it is absolutely at the right focal point because we should not be worried about whether the user understands what this checkbox is at this point. So we need to focus on whether if the user is fundamentally able to achieve this thing or not, because checkbox may not be the right answer at all. Now, once we have validated with the assessment testing if it's usable, then we move on to validation testing. At this point, we generally focus on whether the software is ready for prime time and general release. Usability testing is extremely productive and very useful at these earlier phases. The testing is just done differently, and it's simply good because it requires a lot less overhead to do it that way. Once we are done with our validation testing, we are ready for prime time. We will be exiting with a set of metrics on how and where people got stuck and how time-consuming it was, and so on. So we should be able to pair and compare against any field analytics that we have about how the product performance is in general. So in this video, we have looked at how to think through usability testing, get clarity of objective, and pick the right general instrument to use. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next video. Hello and welcome back. In this session, we will be discussing on a test plan anyone can use. Now, we have talked about where usability fits into the big picture, the ways that we are looping through, and figuring out what's going to be valuable to our user and how we iterate there. And we've also talked about a systematic approach in getting that usability, assessing, designing, and testing it. Today, we should look at a test plan. Now, let's go through this research design here. This is a part of the venture design template. It has few sections. Objectives and methods is where we state the type of testing that we are doing, and there is a boilerplate for this template that we can draw on. But this is where we explain that we talked about the exploratory test plan, and we are looking at different approaches to a given user interface and figuring out which ones make sense, or the assessments where we found what we all like. But we will flush out the space and go through the whole thing, or validation where this is almost ready to go. We're going to test this in detail and time the individual user case because we want to be able to pair this with real field results after the release. So here's what we explain in brief, and people actually say, if we can really do this testing using an interactive markup, or why are we timing everything? Is that really necessary? Put the markup version and the product version here because especially in the exploratory and assessment testing, the important point is we should feel free to update and change the test plan at any point. Now, we are not trying to collect any statistically significant data, but I'm just trying to iterate to a good result. Now, that being said, we would want to take note of the product version so that when we see a result we got from a subject 2 days ago and we change something, we can make sure we also know that we tested with this updated tweaked version that had this change. Now, subjects is where we want to say what personas we're going after and probably want to repeat the screen question for whoever's going to run this. And then research composition this in the various items inside the product that we will be testing. Now, often we get the questions like, can I test kind of area A and area B of the product and have these discontinuities between these two things? Well, the answer is yes. But however, there's a cost to making those transitions. But if that's the right thing to do, then it's completely fine. We need to be mindful of what's going to generate overhead and test in advance. Now, the pre-session checklist is very important. This is the stage where we're going to run through all of the different things to make sure that the test is set up, our recording, the version of the product, and so on. And also, to make sure this is really up and working. So as mentioned earlier, the environment is a bit less forgiving than the more kind of natural, humanized, conversational environment that we are running with in the persona and problem scenarios testing. Now, being a bit more detail-oriented is important here. It makes a lot of difference because if this test goes up sideways, it is hard to recover from that, but yet we still get a good result with the subjects that we have chosen. And then finally, we have the session design down here. Here's an example from an assessment test. So this is our research objective column. And as you can see, the objective is just, hey, how are we doing this on our user story? So this is for a social media automation platform, something like Hootsuite or Buffer, that lets a business say, well, we want to tweet this at 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning. We don't want to remember to do it, so we end up putting a reminder into LinkedIn and Twitter. So we're going to automate that. It's a very notable thing here that the objective is a user story. And that's really important if it's exploratory or an assessment test, because we want to make sure that you don't kind of over anchor into a specific solution. And the validation test is okay. We're going to look at exactly how the set of checkboxes is performing for this given task. Now in upstream, we're still willing to look at whether our approach is fundamentally making sense or whether we should try something different. So it's important to anchor to this more general and a more humanized view of what the objective is. And that's where the user story has a great role in usability testing. Now, this is where the timing kind of comes into place, but this is an assessment test, so we're not going to worry about that. We're going to watch how long and the subject takes to do things, and we can make a note if something was particularly difficult. But we're not going to try and time each and every individual task. We don't have something that's operating at that level of specificity yet. Then we have the moderator guide and the output of what we're trying to observe here. And the moderator guide is pretty specific because if you remember, we want to tell them that you're from this fictional company, and if you want to tweet about this, then please put this tweet in there and put it in for 2 days from now at 8 a.m. and observe whether they're able to do that or not, because we're just trying to test usability and also artificially motivating the subject we're controlling for motivation. Now, the reason why we do actually this is we mingle those things, okay? We're going to kind of get confused in them. We kind of mix up a lot. So the output we're trying to just look at is how the user relates to the available affordances to get these jobs done. So we have a series of these, and we can again move to different parts of the product, but it'll always be much easier and more continuous if you're in one single space at any given point in time. So that's all for this particular video, and I will see you in the next one. Hi everybody and welcome back. In this session, we will discuss about a test plan that anyone can use, and this is part 2 of the session. Previously, we saw how we were able to create something highly usable with a little practice. 30 to 60 minutes to just test an approach and see if it works. So rather than having a 2-hour meeting about usability, why don't we build a prototype and just try to find some people to test with, even if they're not the perfect subject. Now, it's really important to do pre-tests with non-subjects as subjects, which are hard to get. Now, this research design is not as forgiving and facile as the subject interviews that we're doing in the problem scenario sprint. Now, we often find students or advisees getting wrapped up in the prototypes. Now, whether there's a balsamic wireframe or something in HTML, it happens to all of us. It's kind of a natural that we feel the stories and usability design are a little more abstract and harder to relate to. However, primarily we want everything to revolve around these user stories, because that's the place where we are anchoring our core ideas about, number 1, what we want, number 2, who the user is, number 3, what they want to do, and number 4, how we're going to know if they actually achieve that. Now, it is easy when we start getting into the details of a prototype. Now, the top 3 reasons why teams don't test more. Number 1, it's difficult to see that the user can't use your product. But keep in mind that we're trying to build a great product and we have no control over the user on what they actually do. So we should avoid the illusion of control, and we will get much more valuable product on a much more consistent basis. Number 2, in the previous session, we typically saw how a lot of the time when people think of user testing, which is nothing but validation testing. And that's not the only place where we can go as a user testing. Now, there are benefits to testing early and make sure that the approaches make sense before we invent our team's time in building them, which is going to be really hard to change, and we've already spent a lot of money on it. Number 3, it's difficult to get in front of real users. We talked about that. We covered that in detail in Sprint on problem scenarios, but at the same time, we can see how valuable it is to stay in contact with those subjects. Once we make it a habit, we might lower our team's view of how difficult it really is. We advise you to think about doing usability testing early and often. It's extremely rewarding and helps you get to what's valuable for the user in a much more faster way. So I hope you guys learned a lot out of this session. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Hi everyone and welcome back to the session on preparing for usability sprints. Now let's discuss about the things we should do to get ready for usability sprint at the sprint lead. Now in period 0 here, that is the preparation stage, there are 2 main things. You can use your existing test plans, or I would suggest you guys create your own test plan and mockups so that you can run through this and be a better coach to your colleagues. Now the biggest thing is to find the subject. The checklist here on screen is relatively consistent with the things we have probably been doing so far. Now, a few notable things on the subjects are that we should record the subjects during these usability tests. We should record both the screens and their faces because we want to get their facial expressions as well. This again depends on the basis of the subjects we select and our physical location. If you're going to record people, it's more likely that we should have a real release. Now, the second thing is the screener, which can actually be a bit looser. because we just try to get people who generally have the same kind of perspective and habits as our core subject. Now, we can probably be slightly forgiving on the screener in the usability testing. Now, if the product is in a domain-specific area, for example, like HVAC in a hurry, then we need to get someone who knows the area and just cannot get a person who has got the same demographic characteristics as a technician. So again, it will depend on the product, whether it's a sort of broad brush thing aiming for a potentially big audience, or is it aiming for a very specific audience. But in general, we could always be a little looser with the screener. Lastly, we discussed about the venues to bring the subjects, and we talked about the best venue being institutes, wherever our subject goes and does whatever we are interested in. For example, if the family kitchen is distributing appliances, the field is the HVAC technician. They're obviously going to do this in the office in an environment with a laptop, recording camera, or all that sort of stuff. Now, while running user testing, we have to make sure that we have the screen objects. It will again take a lot of our time in getting people lined up in advance. If you've done the personas and problem scenario sprint, you will probably have an experience in that. But if you go to get people off the street and schedule, then we'll have to roughly allocate at least around 30 minutes to just see how people will show up and respond to us. That will vary a lot, and you can tune into your own kind of view, but make sure you actually allocate time for that. Now, we have to make sure that we have the template ready for the research design, and you can find it in the venture design document. We should also have an intro script and paperwork, which would more likely need a release. Next thing is to have a recording setup. As we saw, we had to record the screen and subject in our final recording. We had to make sure to put in a secure place for the frame, their face, and a frame for the screen. By the way, we had to make sure that we had to secure these files with encryption as well, so that they're not generally accessible, and also how to be part of our formal paperwork. So we have to make sure that we link to that as well. Now, for example, if you store and secure it on Google Drive, then we have to make sure that everybody knows how to link from the notes on a test result till the actual recording takes place. Then some small housekeeping detail. These little things are really important because we will not want to lose a recording in 60, 90, or 180 days or so. The most important part of preparing for this design sprint is to practice and go beyond the subject so they're ready for the sprint. Now, design sprints are really an amazingly efficient way to make the software valuable to the user. So I hope all you guys actually enjoyed this session. I love presenting this session to you. I'll see you in the next one. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the session. Now, another thing we have to consider for our usability sprint is a real-time analytics service like Plinky or the Mouseflow. Now, these can be used as a supplemental item to our testing and drafting. Now, they're quite helpful and allows us to see an interpolated view of how the user is interacting with our various web pages. So let's look at an example here. We can see a Mouseflow on a relative website to just periodically look into how our web pages are doing and how the users are interacting with them. Now, if we pick up one of these, we can actually watch a video of how the user is going through the site. We can see the progress over here, and we can see about the different things happening over the course of this session. Now, we may not want to sit and watch the whole thing, but we can see them interacting with the table of contents, like where the users are navigating or the web page, and to check what they're looking into. So another thing that these sites provide is a set of heat maps. We can go down to the heat map section, and a popular page here is about the business model canvas page. What we can see here is that where the user is clicking and where the user is leaving their mouse. So this is a good way to see what people are looking at so that we can get an idea to make those things more clear to the users. And once we set this up and put the proper notices, they will do the work and collect the data for us. It is also available at a reasonably low cost, and it will help us with supplementing ideas about how the users are interacting with our web page. Now, I hope you all guys enjoyed this demo session on something called Mouseflow, which I told you right at the beginning. I will see you in the next session. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the session on usability sprint. Now, the inputs are usual sprint checklist subjects, which are super important. Always practice on testing to make sure your sprint lead is ready. We should have some user stories, and we may also have some focal assumptions as well. Now, user items are those risky or tricky parts to the user. For instance, with the brand lattice item, if you remember, we discussed about the fact that we wanted to use a drag and drop interface on the web. Now, it was unclear whether most users can readily relate to signifier, understand the affordance of drag and drop on the web. So that's the kind of assumption we had to make a note of, so that we will remember to ascribe a lot of importance to it as we run through our test routines. The output should be working test plan, and the interactive mockups and the mockups can be real working software or can be a balsamic mockup. If you're more comfortable in having more finalized looking screens than balsamic mockup, another viable option is to build an interactive prototype in the Keynote or even in PowerPoint. Now, we had to have some of these mockups up done and ready for our previous iterations, so where we are actually thinking through how the customer is and what's really valuable to them. Now, in the AM, we will introduce these concepts, rank our existing user stories and assumptions based on the importance to test, and start working through the test plan items. Then, in consideration of this, we will have to allocate some time to think about the patterns and comparables, wireframes, interactive wireframes, and update our material. But everything else being equal, it's always a good idea to allocate a little bit of time to step back, put extra thought about these, and again run back through them. In the meantime, we may find some kind of realization and things that we want to implement into an environment. So here's our agenda for the AM and the early PM. We will have the slides available to us to warm up the team and to give us some exercise. We will use post-its to write up the key user stories, and then we vote with the sticker dots. One guideline in voting to everybody might also work for you as well. 1/3 plus 1 as the quantity of dots. And then as a group, we can allocate some time to draw focal assumptions based on our previous discussions. This is not only a good way to get some focal points for our testing, but this is also a chance for us to develop a good habit of creating the culture of experimentation. Now, for instance, instead of arguing what's important for the users, we can frame a solution to quickly test it and check its results. Then we can actually take a break. Next, as a group, we will have to serialize our epics to put them in an appropriate order for the test plan. Then we have to pair up and divvy those out and start drafting the test plan items. Now, when it comes to test plans, we can put everybody into the same test plan, or else we can create separate test plans for everybody to use and then converge them at once together. Now, either of them should work fine, but make sure to have it prepared in advance so that we can save around 15 to 20 minutes. So allocate the next 20 minutes for the pairs to review their work, converge, and then get them together in terms of thought and plans. Then you have to go around the room and see if everybody understood it and check whether they're executing test plans with the subject. And then we will have our lunch. It's food time. By this time, we probably would come up with some notes to validate our test plans. So give some time for the individual players to make revisions and allocate rest of the time to the pairs to rethink the wireframes, mockups before they go into testing. Now, sometimes thinking to test an interface is actually a really good way to uncover gaps in usability, experience, and gap in sort of state and transition for the user. So the main idea is to review comparables, draft wireframes and pairs, then discuss about these and convert them into test plans. It can be something that Balsamiq can do, or as mentioned before, it can be in Keynote, PowerPoint, or a working software, or something like a front-end HTML or a CSS software in tandem. So that's the conclusion of day one. By the time you should be geared up and ready to start thinking about how to test at this point. Hope you all enjoyed day one of running usability tests. I'll see you in the day two session. Thanks. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the session on usability sprints. Now in this session, we're going to come up with a working test plan and an interactive mockup. Now in the first part of the two, we will be practicing and making sure that everyone is comfortable with the test plan setups. And in these periods, we will also be testing with the subjects and come up with some test plan results. Then in days 4 and 5, we're going to do a combination of entering it again and do a little more test to drive closer to our conclusions. In day 2, we will have to do an AM dry run test of test plans and the PM test plan with subjects, and continue with the same for day 3. Now in day 2, we can allocate 1 hour for dry runs, and after this we can carry out some necessary revision and tweaks which are necessary to the setup. We can divvy those out to the individuals and complete them. It's likely that we will not require so much of time, but there's a pretty high cost associated by not carrying out the required revisions before we bring in the subject. We all know we have invested a lot of time in getting the subject, so this is a little heavy. It's better to be slow and to feel strongly than we are ready to go ahead. Now going further, we will test the subjects and continue to do the same thing for the next day. So we will be running through this test plans. We will be recording and making notes early on. So you remember about the persona interviews and the importance of making sure how the teams are driving the insights after every interview. Same thing follows here. Our job will not just be to complete after the test plans and assume that we will be able to look back at the data to make wonderful insights. We should also carry the insights with us as we go along, which will impact our focus and the way we ask the things with the subject. Now the same general rule applies here. As a sprint lead, we should be results oriented and ask the questions to our colleagues like, how did that go? What did they notice? Do they have any insights to share or help us to write it down? Else it will always be costly to lose those great insights. So these may be a little tough for the first few times. Do not panic, and that's normal. Now with a little bit of more practice, we will be able to run the usability test plan seamlessly, which will really help us. So I hope you guys enjoyed this session on day 2. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you on day 3. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the session on running usability tests. Now, in the previous session, we discussed about day 2 and day 3. Now, let's discuss about running the usability tests on day 4. Now, by this time, we will be having some preliminary tests and some team experience actually handling them. And what I mean by that is not necessarily just the initial experience of running the design sprint, because you have a long-standing product, and you'll probably do this a few more number of times than just once. But it's the experience of running these particular tests with these particular subjects in this particular area. The keyword here is particular. Our outputs will be top learnings. So if you have time, we can tweak the test plan and the mockups. Then in the afternoon, we can drive into more results. So here is our agenda for day 4. The idea will be to come in by 10, taking notes of those insights on their notes as they're executing the test plan. Next, we will do the sticker dot voting, and then we will use it to drive a discussion of what insights are most critical and what we should be doing about them. We should dedicate those, and we should actually dedicate some time to decide on updates, revise, take a break, and then retest. So this is very important, and it's very tight to figure out a bunch of changes and to make them. So we have to make sure to retest and try not to burn our valuable subjects out. Now, once we get them in the afternoon, we have to go back, run the revised test plans, and to see what it shows us. We have to run exploration test plan and assessment test plan. It would be necessary for us to think in a very iterative fashion and to redesign it. So this is less applicable when we are at the end stage and have our product to release, because we will be less inclined to make the last minute changes. Now, after the validation testing, we still will be having some little facets and details which we'll be concerned with as we will be ready to release the stuff. We will still find the things to tweak and revise about the way we run the actual test plan. Now, this is just a guideline, okay? So remember that. As you start to find out what works for you, you should always change and tune this to your own methodology. You should always feel free to tune it based on you and your own team's personal experiences. So that's all for this particular session. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you on day 4. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the session on usability sprints. Now, by day 5, we will be having our test plan results. So now we can figure out what we have learned and decide upon the upcoming tests. Now, let us spend the morning of day 5 by finishing up our testing so that we will be left with plenty of time in the afternoon to make the final set of conclusions and to drive to our next steps. So in the morning, we will do our test plan, repeat the tasks we did on day 4, and post those top learnings. Stick a vote on them to drive the discussions and assign peers to review our test plan notes. Now, coming to test notes, we will probably have fewer notes, and yes, we will have the recordings, but make sure to use the cleanings up as the transcripts. Now, we are making notes on the insights. It has to be in a detailed way, important because of the whole point of this is actually a cure to an asset. So what other people can refer back to our notes and can make valuable insights just as we did. So we can keep it as usable and a readable form. Then we will have some time to do updates on that, and then we can take a break. Next, we will go ahead and make the revisions to our mockups, software, and test plans. Then we will review and prepare our next steps. We will go to build the software, decide upon architecture, rinse, and repeat the stuff. So this is a time to decide upon specific view of what will be valuable to the user and be ready to build that specific software. So now we learn to take this sort of nebulous thing of usability testing and put it in the right place into the process. So we should have a systematic way of thinking through it and should possess a test regime which will be very appropriate and highly approachable. Now, we with our team have to make sure to figure out the usable and valuable process to the end user before we go and release the software. Thereby, we have come to an end of the usability tests in their day. Hope you guys enjoyed this session. If you have questions, send them in. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next lecture. Hello and welcome back to the session on Architecture Sprint. Now, this is a well-established concept, particularly in XP Extreme programming. One of the methodologies that we will be learning. Now, there's the idea of an architecture spike. This is an iteration or a story that you describe where you want to investigate a technical question of major substance. It may be a really hard problem where you struggle to even make a course estimate or a big build versus buy decision or a chunk on your functionality. Or it may be a choice between alternatives if you're buying, be it commercial or open source components. You might have thought that Agile was all about working software and not about making big plans. And the authors of these methodologies advise that you should use these sparingly because working software in small evidence-based batches is the best way to shake out the correct choices and see how things will work out for you. We will talk about some ideas to think about these architecture decisions about approach, and these are mostly for larger questions about components, things on top of which you will build your solution. The first one is achieving focus. So once you have a user whom you understand, a narrative which you want to provide them, know the problems you want to solve. Have solutions you want to deliver again, that and tests. It will be a lot easier to answer all the specific questions that will come up. If you're going to do an architect spike or sprint, or even submit a story for this, those investigations will be clearer and more focal. The place where sometimes this activity may have a little bit of deficit is the roles behind these decisions. You need to consider all the roles. This is a place where you want to get your team together and have some kind of a session experience where you really think about all the inferences of these different choices. However, if you think about the life of a component, you may come up with some non-obvious questions, which are quite important. For example, questions such as, is this a good choice for developers? Can they develop against this? Is it a good fit? How does that work for testers? How does it work for operations people out in the field who are managing the system with you? Can they support this infrastructure choice that you will make? Is it harder or easier for them? Can they train on it, or is it going to be difficult? These are the kind of non-obvious questions. Also, examples such as, are there sort of editors and non-engineer people? Would you be able to come in and manipulate items and change them? If so, how are these facilities for them? Now, one choice may allow for that, and another makes it hard where coders who are busy doing other things would have to make changes that are otherwise easy in another alternative. You may want to assess out all of these different roles and de-alienate so you can make your choices against the bigger picture. Next, I would make sure to rank the problems. Where the solution that you're making is involved, I would start with things that are absolutely in need and that should have a massively high priority from a decision-making standpoint and an investigation standpoint. Then things that you need based on a good notional evidence, and things that are strictly speculative. So one of the things you will learn about approaches to development of Agile is to make sure you're really focused on the problems you have right now when you build decoupled solutions for those. So rank your problem scenarios, highlight the importance on the problems which you have now. Sometimes this will be in conflict with your idea that you're making a big choice and you want it to be far-reaching. There is no solution there. You need to carefully use your judgment about the problems you think you may have in the future and figure out how much importance you want to assign to those. Next, you want to look at a broad picture of a software component or a platform that you think you are using. You need to think about its scope. You have to decide if you need a narrow slice or if it's really broad. In this case, you may build it yourself. For example, this is because you have a lot of other elements. Next, you need to think about its direction and whether you're using it in a way that the vendor or open source community that is supporting it is taking the same route. So these are the things which are not really pivotal decision points, but they are things that you always need to consider. Now, the next one you need to think about is the operating environment in which the solution is going to operate. For example, you can get talent to work on the solution. It will change over time, and a new solution may be a good choice, even if few people do know it, because it will grow, it will evolve, and it is a good fit, or it might mean the component is very thinly distributed. So, it's difficult to hire people who know it. Although you can train them, it is an inconvenience, and it is harder to find documentation, discussion boards, all kind of intangibles that make one solution more robust and easier to deal with than another. So to make a quick baseline on this, do a Google search. For example, the programming language SWF is an alternative to Objective-C for writing apps on the Apple platform. A Google search was done on SWF. It has 4.8 million entries, whereas Objective-C has 65. This does not mean that one is better than the other, but this new thing will have less material out there than the other, and that's been there for a long time. There are two things which have been out there as an equal amount of time, and one has more search results than the other. This tells you that it's widely circulated, used or discussed, and there's a community of practice around it. Job sites are another good place to do a course benchmark on these kind of things. On a job site, there are 10 jobs related to SWF programming and 65 related to Objective-C. You can see the differences between the resolution is newer or thinly distributed in these things, so you need to assess if it's important or not. Now, the other thing that you need to look at is comparables. You need to look at discussion boards online, places like Stack Overflow, or something particular that pertains to your area of expertise. Discuss with peers and colleagues who work in other environments, and let your staff do the same. Discuss their practical experiences. Know their emotional experiences. Very important. Now, it's better to go out and find out about people's real-life experiences rather than learning how this works from scratch. Also, all those intangible goods and bads that would make your choice a really great choice. Finally, you need to build a prototype to make these evaluations. So, use these things to narrow your choices that you're going to evaluate and try to build some sample executions. As Agile tells us, working software is a great way to work out what's really important and identify what is not important and speculative. So, these are the things whose implications and importance you need to consider for any kind of architecture decision that you will want to make or will make in the present future. Thanks a lot for watching this video and the session. I'll see you in the next one. In this session, everybody, we will discuss the Model View Controller Framework. If you're not from a software development background, this is an empirical concept which helps you to have better discussion with your development team. And if you are from a software development background, this view of this model view controller might help you to have those same discussions and facilitate them with your product owner. Or if you have non-technical counterparts with whom you're working with and trying to get the right inputs with them. So let us see how this model view controller works. Let us say we have a view and I'm pulling up my profile on Facebook. I'm looking at Facebook and saying, please show me my profile. Now from the view, I click show profile and then there's some logic in Facebook, which is part of the controller, which tries to get my profile stuff. It goes to some data model somewhere, finds that, retrieves it, and sends it back to the controller, and the controller returns this in a readable format that I can understand, maybe in an HTML file that I can see in my browser. Now, we will go through these components. First, we will talk about the model. Now, we're just thinking about the model as something that contains data. It could be a database of some kind, or some other kind of data structure, or just could be a text file. In general, it's always a database. Now, there are a couple of relationships that might help you understand data in a simplified way. They explain the real-life relationships between things, or may help you explain things to your developer in a way that is easy for them to understand. Here we will see those two kinds of relationships. First, we have what is called a relationship, which is a, and then we have a has a relationship. So, a dog is an animal, is an example of a is a relationship. A dog has a tail, it has a nose, it has furry feet, and so on, is an example of a has a relationship. So there are common ways where one type of data relates to another type of data. So the key thing with the model from a product design standpoint is that as a team, you will have good narrative discussions. And you'll make the data model that you implement mirror the real-life relationships between things you look at closely as possible. And this will make the system easier to maintain and deal with. So there are some ideas about the data model. Next, we will look at the view, which is one of the more intuitive components. Now, this is just what the user sees on the screen. We have already talked about user cognition and how to use comparables to stick to well-established patterns of user experience and user cognition, so that we don't force the user think when they don't need to think about that we want to achieve. So you need to stick to established patterns or you will end up with a less good user experience which isn't very optimal. Now the controller is kind of a logic of the software that sequentially figures out what should happen to the user. They're anchored in narrative, user stories, prototypes, wireframes, which helps us have interdisciplinary discussions about what we want to build so that we can get the right answer. And if you don't come from a software development background, you will learn that controllers are a lot more detailed. Then you may think that you want the user to actually pull up off their profile. Now when you get into the details, for example, you start attaching text cases to a user story. You need to think about a lot more things. If you're not used to doing product design and software development, these are some ideas about how to think about functional pieces of software with the model view controller framework. So if you're looking to have more natural discussion on how you will approach certain things for your engineering team, this might be helpful to organize different topics and concepts in a way that you can discuss them easily with your counterparts and your peers. So thanks a lot for watching this particular session on the controller framework. I'll see you in the next session. Hi everybody and welcome back. In this session we will see how to prepare for architecture sprints. Now the duration of this architecture sprint has a lot more variation than the other design sprints that we've discussed. This is because the questions that you may try to answer really vary quite a lot in size and magnitude. So I could not prescribe a specific number of days for this one. Although I think 5 days is really pretty good. On day 1 I would have discussions, narrative, collaboration, where, for example, you may talk about different roles and modalities of whatever you're evaluating from an architecture approach standpoint. You may also talk about the roles, the narratives, all different people that may need to deal with this component or area in some way. Now, the output of that will be user stories and probably more specific tasks, and then your team will work on those. Now, mainly your software development team and maybe your test team will work on those, but everybody should involve if they possibly can. At the end, you probably want to have some kind of outtakes. Now, if it made sense to build some kind of prototype, maybe a demo, in most cases you will have the development team answer some kind of question here about what they think is the best approach, given what you want to achieve with the software. This is what you will debrief on, and so the output at the end is a decision about approach. Now, as I discussed, Agile generally recommends breaking big decisions into smaller decisions and observe how they go over time. Sometimes you may have to make big decisions, but in general, you want to consider if there's a way where you can somehow break that decision into pieces in a way that does not generate waste and make smaller decisions which enables us to see the output along the way. Now, this is another thing that you need to think about as you discuss your approach on this design sprint here. We would generally have the same things that we have talked about for these design sprints. Particularly, make sure you have money to sign up or get a third party to help you get some questions answered. So, if there are reasonable expenses which you want to have a provision for, just ensure that you do groundwork to make that available, so your team need not waste time to arrange for the same. So, there are some ideas on evaluating questions about architecture or approach to building your software which you may want to consider. Although your software development team may have a lot of experience in evaluating alternatives, as it's a big part of their job. Now, these are a few additional ideas that might help you simplify better interdisciplinary collaboration and enables better discussion on the choices that you will make. So, thanks a lot for watching this particular video. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi everybody, and welcome back. Now, it's difficult to make certain that you have time to do something valuable, and this is where a lot of teams always have a lot of trouble. However, you learn a very practical approach to make time as well as to make sure you exit with valuable outputs which will help you to drive to valuable agile outcomes with your software, both in your professional life and your personal life. Now, you learn how to do that through investigating and observing your users, so you know what is on their A list, and you could deliver value to them. You will learn how to do it so that you can test your plans before you invest in building software against them. Now, this makes you avoid software that nobody's really interested in. You learn how to concept, you learn how to do test usability before you actually build your dream software. Therefore, you enter your software development process with strong ideas about the output, and you learn how to use the design sprint to evaluate architecture choices. So if you have questions about approach, you can work together as a team to always make good decisions that are not only economically viable, but are profitable as well against your efforts. Congratulations on finishing this session. Thanks a lot.